Hello. Hi, everybody. Whoops. Sorry, I'm going to be popping on and off screen for the first few minutes here, and I'll tell you why. Because some of you are entering as guests, and whenever someone enters as a guest, I have to pop off the screen to authorize that guest to enter the room. So what I will ask is very kindly, if you will please in the future log in through your registered username. You should all have a username and password of your very own. And if you do that, then I will not have to pop off screen to let you into the room. Here we go again. All right. So again, please, if you could not enter as guests in the future, but enter as a registered user, that would be awesome. So hi, how is everybody tonight? Can you see me? Can you hear me, etc.? Ah, okay. Good news. Wonderful. Great. You can see me. You can hear me. My mic is on. All good things. So, hi and welcome to the Veritas Prep GMAT course. My name is Anthony and I will be your instructor. And again, I'm going to authorize this guest. In the future, please log in as registered users. And let's begin. How's everyone doing tonight, by the way? Great. Jaw's great. Ben is great. Shawali is great. Steven is great. Reza's just good, but with an exclamation point, so I'm a little confused, but good or great, whatever. Awesome. Zahir. I'm doing well as well. Thank you for asking, Shawali. Sounds like people are in a good mood. I'm excited. Today we're going to talk about foundations of GMAT logic, except I'm going to let this guest in the room first. Okay, guest is in the room. Alrighty. Oh, no, still more guests. Okay, that guest is in as well. Sorry, I know it's annoying. I have to keep jumping off screen, but this will end very shortly once everyone's kind of in here. Keenan, is that how you pronounce it? Keenan is typing, so I'll give you a minute. But while you're typing, I'm going to go ahead and start to talk a little bit about what this is all about and what our goal is for the evening. Tonight we are going to tell you a little bit about the GMAT. Sometimes we have some people who, for whatever reason, the software is a little funky for. So I'm going to write a note about this. If you cannot see or hear, please leave and re-enter. We are live. We are live now. Video and sound. Okay. Obviously, when I say this, only the people who can see and hear are going to see and hear it. But I will say this for future reference. If in the future you find yourself in the situation that we're past the start of class and you cannot see and hear, and other people seem to be seeing, hearing, communicating, etc., please just leave the room and re-enter. That is Troubleshooting 101, and unfortunately all the troubleshooting I know, I am actually not a tech person at all. So if leave and re-enter does not solve your problem, the next step is, I don't know, call customer service, call the main office, and they will fix it for you. Okay? But moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit about the test itself and a little bit about the Veritas Prep course, so you know what to expect in terms of both the test and the course. And then after that, in the latter half of the evening, we will talk a little bit about the foundations of logic, the stuff that we're actually here for, of how the GMAT tests the way that you think rather than just what you know, and what we need to do to make sure that we master this. Okay? So that's the plan, but before we do any of those things, the first thing, Keenan, can you see and hear now? Keenan is popped back up, so hopefully you can see and hear. Still not getting any video or audio. Sorry, I also have to jump off screen to type, but I want to make sure that everyone's squared away and seeing and hearing. I don't want to leave anyone behind. Anyway, the very first thing that we're going to do tonight, oh, not that, is introductions. Shoot, does anyone have the Veritas main number on hand? I have it somewhere in my phone. I'm going to see. Number I have for Veritas. So try that. Hopefully that number will work. Okay, so hi. It's nice to meet all of you. And I will say one of the things I always love about doing these online courses is I love how wonderfully diverse the people are who I get to meet from all over the country and all over the world. And I'd love to learn a little bit about you. I presumably already know your name, but certainly love to know a little bit about who you are, what you do, what you want to do, professionally or whatever, where you went to school, where you want to go to school. But on top of all that, I especially want to hear what, if any, experience you have with the GMAT, what your strengths and weaknesses are, things you want to work on. If you've taken a test before or a practice test and you want to share your score, that would be really helpful. Basically, we have some ability to tailor this course to the needs of our specific students, and so the more that we know about you, the more that you let me know about what your needs are, the more that I can try to customize this to meet your specific needs. So if you guys would like to take just a couple minutes and type up a little blurb about yourself, I would love to hear them. And I'll give you a minute to do that right now. I'll step off screen for 1 minute. I'll be right back. Ben is from Chicago. Hi, Siddharth. Let's see, Greg is in DC. Hey, me too. What a fun coincidence. Greg Benante, of course. Wink. 600 time to get to 700. Want to do Darden. Okay, great. Cecilia is from Mexico originally, now live in Virginia. What part, Cecilia? Are you in the DC area as well, or are you further down? Never taken the GMAT before. Jocelyn is in Florida. Shawali is Richmond. Okay, nice. Richmond is nice. Shawali graduated with a bachelor's in computer science from Texas at Arlington, relatively recently, only about a year ago. Okay, technical analyst. Let's see. Carla's in Houston. I'm going to make fun of Houston later. Akil's name is Akil. That's good to know. Let's see. They're scrolling too fast. Okay, who else do I have here? Akil is a geologist in Houston. Hey, we got a big Houston crowd. You should hang out with Carla. Siddharth is from India, in Montreal for the last 8 years. Been up as high as 690. That's pretty good. Steven's from Wisconsin, but works in Chicago, went to USC, etc. Shreya's from Texas, big Texas contingent. Ronak is having some trouble with the quant. Okay, possibly overthinking. From the Mitten, from Michigan, yeah, great. Matt's from New Jersey, went to Villanova. Got a lot of people looking to get up over 700. Jaws from New York City, degree in biology, very cool. Raises from Toronto, industrial engineer. Again, everyone's trying to get to 700. I am live on screen and talking, Keenan. Sorry, I stepped off screen for just a minute because you guys were scrolling too fast and I need to read through some of the comments here. But can you see and hear me now? I really hope so. Daniel's got it in a 610 on a practice test, needs help on quant. Rory's from DC and New York. Ben's from Chicago, attended Michigan. Great. Renisha, I hope I'm pronouncing, by the way, everyone, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing your names wrong. I'm doing my very best. If I do pronounce it wrong, feel free to correct me. But Renisha is the third person in Houston. Man, we should get like a Houston meetup group for you guys or something. Chemist, hoping to hit 700, got a 500. Daniel's in Houston as well. My God, please, Houston people, form a study group, hang out, something. Like, there's like 4 of you. It's a shame if you don't. Okay, lots of 700 seekers, lots of people in Houston. This seems to be the trend here. I suppose I should tell you a little bit about myself as well. My name's Anthony. Zahir is a data scientist and got a 610 after cramming. Time management, okay. All right, thank you. I really appreciate all the lovely and very detailed introductions, and I certainly have, we'll have this chat saved so I'll be able to look back over it. And it's very, very nice to meet all of you. It's a wonderful, diverse group again this time. My name is Anthony, Anthony Ritz. This is my email address. This is my telephone number. Both of these are in the slides. And by the way, did you guys all notice that I emailed you the slides roughly 5 minutes before the start of class? I don't want you to go through the slides before we meet, so I don't want to email them too far in advance, because I really just want to have the surprise reveals of the slides as we go through together. But I do give them to you, try to remember to give them to you a few minutes before we start so that you have the ability to follow along on the slides in case, for whatever reason, you want to, in case you're having trouble seeing on the screen, and just so you have them for your records and can go back over them at your leisure. So you will have all of this information in the slide deck that I emailed you. Beyond this information, I'll tell you a few other things about myself. I did my undergrad at Georgia Tech. I was a math and physics double major. After that, I did not go to business school, so I'm not the right person to ask all these questions about what's business school really like, because I don't know. But I went to law school. I went to Georgetown for law school. Yes, I went to Georgetown for law school, and I'm an inactive member. Oh, cool! One of your good friends attending Georgetown for law. Well, very cool. We should you should hook me up with your good friend, and we should swap Georgetown law school stories. I wonder if we had any of the same professors or anything. Should tell them definitely take Seidman. If he's still teaching there, Seidman's the best. Okay, well, she should definitely take Seidman if she can. Seidman is awesome. Really like Seidman. There's a bunch of good professors there, though. I could name like 10 more. So whatever, she'll have a great time. The number's not working? Okay, I'm sorry, Keenan. I don't know what else to tell you. Is there another number anyone has? I put up a number that I have that generally works, but I don't have... yeah, I'm not sure what else to suggest. Does anyone else have a number, a different phone number? Sorry, I hate to keep delaying the class, but I also hate for anyone to just completely miss out. So let's try to take care of this if we can. The website has a call now link, actually. Just at the top, it says we're open, call now. So I think if you just click on the link on the website, that should work. Also, a few people are giving different phone numbers. There's a couple different numbers. There's a local number. There's a couple 800 numbers that should get you there. Hopefully one of them will work. Okay, so we've got a number on the receipt on the class. We've got a general 800 number. We've got a local number. You got 3 choices for numbers and a call now link on the website. Sorry, I just don't know what else to suggest. Please try. I hope, again, I know this is dumb. He can't hear me saying any of this. Hopefully he will try one of those numbers and it'll work and he'll get through and we'll get him squared away. There's nothing else I can do. So yeah, that's the number I already put up, the 925-7737. That's the one that I had on my phone. That should work as well, but okay. Yes, it is. Please also let him know it is being recorded for later viewing. Okay, so really need to move forward here. A little about myself. As I mentioned, undergrad Georgia Tech, law school Georgetown. Having said that, I did not practice law. I am a full-time private tutor. This is my real job, such as it is. You know, it's as close to a real job as I get. I always feel the need to put real job in air quotes because it doesn't feel like that. I basically stand in a room all alone and talk to myself, and normally that's not a job for most people. Normally that's a mental condition. But they pay me for my mental condition, so hey, good for me. You know? So it's what I do. And although I did not go to business school, I have, of course, taken the GMAT, and my GMAT score was a 790, which is 99th percentile. My section scores were 51 on both quant and verbal, which is 99th percentile on both quant and verbal, the maximum score on both, actually. My AWA, my essay score, you know, was a 6, which is also the perfect score there. And although I took it before integrated reasoning was officially a section, I've taken a number of unofficial integrated reasoning sections, and I generally score 8s on that, which is also the perfect score on integrated reasoning. So I have something like 17 to 18 years of tutoring experience. I've been with Veritas for 10 years. I've done this for way too long, I think, is the basic point. And I like to think that I know at least a little bit about this test, and hopefully I can help you gain some of that knowledge and experience and help you have similar success. Any questions so far other than why is my screen black? Anything? Sorry, I'm just typing a quick note to Keenan. Okay. A couple people are typing. I'll give you a minute. See, I'm just not a tech person. I can't troubleshoot anything. So my complete troubleshooting is, I don't know, turn it off and back on again. And then second step, call tech support. There's not, Reza. It's going to be all text. We've tried the microphone in the past. It gets a little chaotic. You know, somebody leaves their mic on, and then we get background noise. And it's just, I think, a little better in my experience if we do it typed out. But I will do my very best to read all of your comments in real time and try to respond as quickly and clearly as I can. So I hope that will work. Any other questions? Okay. So, I've met you, you've met me. Let's all meet the GMAT, shall we? Let's start by talking about the format of the GMAT, and here it is. So you got the check-in, the interactive tutorial, but after that you're going to have there's going to be 4 sections of the GMAT. And I know most of you have already, sound like you've taken a practice test or taken the real thing, but a few of you hadn't. And so maybe for those few of you who haven't taken it, this is going to be really useful, and those of you who have taken it, I may still say a couple things that are news to you and give you a little bit of extra insight. But I do want to warn those of you who have no experience with this test, who have no idea what's on this test, I just want to warn you that the underwater basket weaving section is really hard. Really, really, really hard underwater basket weaving section on this test. Make sure you spend lots of time. And say that's a joke, right? But, ha ha ha. Okay. Also, somebody clicked the raise your hand button. It was probably just an error, but I will say this. I'm real casual. You don't need to raise your hand for anything. You don't ever need to click the raise your hand button. If you want to shout something out, just please shout it out, okay? And if you want to shout it out in private, you can, I think, right-click on my name. You can private chat to me. But generally speaking, you can just use the classroom chat, and it'll be cool. So anyway, okay, no, the underwater basket weaving section is actually not that bad, but there are 4 sections on the GMAT, and you have a choice of orders, so it may or may not be in this order for you, and that's actually up to you. But I'm going to assume you do it in this order, just so I have a way to talk about it. The first section you do could be the quantitative reasoning, the math section. And then you would have verbal, and then you would have analytical rating assessment and integrated reasoning. Those are the 4 sections on the test. Although there are 4 sections, only the first 2 of them, the quantitative reasoning and the verbal, actually count towards your primary GMAT score. That number between 200 and 800 that everyone talks about when we say, you know, what did you score on the GMAT, that is not affected at all by what happens in the analytical rating assessment or the integrated reasoning whatsoever. Okay, it is only a function of your quantitative and verbal reasoning scores. The AWA and the integrated reasoning are scored only separately. Those scores are also reported, but everyone agrees that they are significantly less important than your primary GMAT score. Now, how much less important? Depends on who you ask. It varies. It ranges anywhere from not very important to not at all important, and we will talk about that later. We will have a book at the very end of the course on these 2 sections. In the meantime, I just ask you to basically not worry about them. I'll say a couple words about them in a minute today, but after that, we're just going to ignore them for the next 5 weeks. For some schools, integrated reasoning may start to be a little bit more important. That's true, but it depends on the school. And even though it's becoming more important relative to what it was, I still think that your primary score, the quant and verbal score, is the big one that most schools care about far more than anything else. So we'll give it some time, but we're going to give it some time at the end. And again, until then, just don't stress about it, all right? We'll give it what it needs, and you'll do fine on it. But the big sections, the math and the verbal. The math is 31 questions in 62 minutes. That is exactly 2 minutes per question on average. Obviously, some will take more time and some will take less, but you do need to hit that 2-minute average overall or you're not going to finish. The verbal reasoning question is slightly faster, 36 questions in 65 minutes. If you do the math on that, it's right around 1:50, just under 1:50 per question. So it's a little bit faster on the verbal section. And then after each of those 2 sections, you will get an optional 8-minute break. The breaks are very strict. If you run long, your timer is running. So please make sure that you don't dally, or you will find your clock running when you come back in after, say, 9 minutes. After that, you do have the essay. As I've already said, it is a single 30-minute long essay. It is scored on a 0 to 6 scale in half-point increments. It is scored only separately. And a score of 4 or better is considered passing even by those schools that care at all. Finally, but again, maybe not finally, depending on what order you do these in, you have the integrated reasoning section, which is 12 questions in 30 minutes, bringing together concepts from both quant and verbal. That sounds like a lot of time, 12 questions in 30 minutes, but it's not, since each question has multiple parts. It ends up being more like 1 part per minute. You generally end up with more like 30 parts in 30 minutes. So it's actually very, very, very fast and puts a lot of pressure on your time management. And that's it. That's the test. All told, you're going to be there for, 3 hours or so. Actually a little more than 3 hours with the breaks, almost 3.5 actually. And then you get a score. Well, you get a few scores. So that's the basics, but let's talk a little bit about some other things about these sections, like what is actually in them. The quantitative reasoning, the math section, has two different question types. You've got problem solving and data sufficiency. It's roughly 60-40. There's a little more problem solving than there is data sufficiency, but there's a good amount of both. Problem solving is your traditional 5 choices, pick the right answer. You've seen that on every standardized test ever. Data sufficiency is a little bit different. It's less about what's the right answer and more about what information would I need in order to get the answer. And it's kind of unique to the GMAT. It's a little weird. You've probably never seen anything quite like it before. And that's okay. We will have a book about halfway through this course on data sufficiency where we go through in some depth what it's really about and how you really want to approach it. And in the meantime, I would ask that you kind of just bear with us, that you just sort of do your best on the data sufficiency and, again, letting guests in the room, do your best on the data sufficiency and don't get too stressed about it and understand the answers are coming. I would love to do the data sufficiency sooner, but I can't really do that lesson until I've taught you a lot of the foundational math, because otherwise you understand the question type, but you don't actually understand the question, and it doesn't help. So what is that foundational math? Well, the subject matter of the math, I have good news and bad news. The good news about the math on the GMAT is that it is all entirely middle school math. And that's good news, right? And the reason I think that's good news is because you have all, presumably, graduated from middle school. As far as I could tell from your introductions, none of you are presently middle school students. Do I have that right? And you've all graduated from middle school, and please correct me if I'm wrong. And if I'm right in that assumption, then that means that at some point in your life, you have all demonstrated a fundamental ability to do things like arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and some really basic probability statistics, combinatorics, stuff like that, just really middle school level stuff. You have demonstrated that you can do that. And so unless you've had a traumatic brain injury since middle school, and again, please let me know if that's the case, but unless you have, I'm going to assume that you all have it in you somewhere, and oh no, I'm so sorry, let's see. Just got off the phone, technical support office is closed, nothing suggested worked. Oy, Keenan, that sucks. Okay, so I'll be in touch with Keenan and we'll make sure that we get this squared away. I just can't do it during class. Okay, so that's the good news. The good news is that you all have the ability, and I have complete faith in you, to master the mathematical content of this test. I have no doubt that every single person in here can learn, can master arithmetic, algebra, geometry, probability stats at a basic level, stuff like that. There's also some bad news about the math on this test, unfortunately. The bad news about the math on this test is that pretty much all of it is middle school math. And you know that's really bad news because based on your introductions, I'm going to assume that for most of you it's been at least a few years since middle school. And so I understand that that means that most of this math is probably not that fresh for most of you, since, you know, you haven't done this kind of stuff in quite some number of years. I'm very sympathetic to that. I understand it completely, and we will make sure to give you the tools that you need in order to relearn and remaster this math. But back on the positive side, what I can say is that I'm very confident that with that work and with that time and effort, you will, in fact, remaster this content. You are all capable. Okay? On the verbal side, we've got 3 types of questions. We've got critical reasoning, sentence correction, reading comprehension, roughly even 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 across the section. Critical reasoning is based in the logic of argument. Sentence correction is based in grammar. And reading comprehension is based in, well, I guess, reading. And we will talk more about each of those skills. We have a book for each of those things. Analytical writing assessment is analysis of an argument. There's several different things in integrated reasoning, and I'm not going to focus on that right now. One other thing that I want you to know about the GMAT is that it's a cat. Not like the cute cuddly kind, the vicious claw-filled kind. It's a computer adaptive test, okay? And that has several implications for every aspect of your test-taking experience with the GMAT. First and most obviously, you will take the GMAT on a computer, okay? You don't have a paper version of this test at this point. You are taking the GMAT on a computer. But it's not just that you're going to take the test on a computer. In fact, you will take in the test chosen by the computer as you are taking the test. No two people see exactly the same GMAT, and what GMAT you see depends on how you're doing on the test. It's adaptive. And as a general matter, the way it works, roughly speaking, is that if you're doing very well on the test, on average, the questions will get harder and harder until the test finds something you can't do. On the flip side, if you're really struggling, doing poorly, missing a lot of questions, then on average those questions will get easier until the test finds something you can do, however low level that may be, and hopefully you get back on the right track. Okay? But generally speaking, question right, harder question wrong, easier question. It's sort of like playing a game of 20 questions. Is your number higher or lower than this or that? Except that occasionally the person lies, right? Every once in a while you lie. You say, hey, I can't do that question, but actually you could. Or you say, hey, I can totally do it, but actually it was a lucky guess. And so the algorithm is very smart. It accounts for that. And so it does some weird things sometimes, or something that looks weird, like it says, can you do this? And you're like, yes, I can. And then it's like, I don't think you really can. It asks you again at the same level. But what it's really doing is it's trying to see if maybe you were just kidding. You know, you were just joking, that you can't actually do that question, or you could. Who knows? In turn, the fact that this test is computer adaptive and the fact that this test is going to give you different levels of question based on your ability affect everything else about the test-taking process. For one thing, you cannot go back to any question that you've already answered. And this is very important because a lot of people manage their time that way. On other tests like the SAT or the GRE or other things you may have taken, the ACT, you can move freely back and forth within a section. And when you get a question that's very hard and you're concerned about the time you'd spend on it, the time management, whatever, what a lot of people do is they say, I'll skip that and I'll come back time permitting at the end of the section. The only problem with doing that on the GMAT is you can't. Because on the GMAT, once you've picked an answer and pressed submit, you can never go back. It's done. It's gone. And it's not just because the test makers are assholes and they want to make your life miserable. I mean, not saying that's not the case, but that's not why they're doing this. They're doing this because they have to. They're doing this because if you think about how the adaptive works, it has to grade your answer on this question, even just in order to know what question to give you next, right? Because the next question is based on whether you got this one right or wrong. So they can't let you skip a question and come back to it. They need to know whether you got it right or not. So they have to force you to answer every question, and once you've answered, and as soon as you've seen the next question, they can't let you go back because they've already graded the previous one. This puts additional pressure on your time management, okay? Because this normal way that you kind of skip and come back to hard questions isn't an option. A lot of people who are very stubborn get just murdered by the time management of this test because, remember, the GMAT will find questions you can't do. That's its job. The adaptive will keep getting harder till it finds something you can't do. Not just one or two, but lots of them, actually. And if you're the sort of person who has learned that through hard work and perseverance, you can do anything. Look, I get it. It's a wonderful life skill. If you work hard enough and long enough, you can achieve almost anything. But if you take that to the GMAT, all it's going to do for you is it's going to have you spending 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes fighting a question that you can't handle and completely wrecking your time management. Because see, it's a 2-minute average, but it's not the 3-minute questions that kill you. It's the 5-minute questions that kill you. It's the 6-minute questions. Because, you know, 3-minute question here, 1-minute question there, it all balances out. But there's no number of 1-minute questions you're realistically going to get that's enough to make up for that 5, 6, 7, 8-minute question. I have seen people spend 8 minutes on a question, and invariably it is ugly. It does not go well. Rory, what I'll say about your question is that while it's possible to get a high score if you don't finish every question, certainly if you miss one or two at the end, it's not going to be the end of the world. Any question you don't get to is just wrong. It's exactly the same as if you had gotten to it and picked the wrong answer. The downside being, if you had gotten to it, you at least would have had a 1 in 5 chance of guessing the darn thing right. So not even getting to it is worse than a random guess. You didn't even get that lucky guess chance to it. And so 1 or 2 answers at the end won't kill you, but if you're sitting there large swaths of questions unanswered, it's going to murder you. It's going to be really impossible to kind of come back from. I don't know what score I would get if I got the first 25 math questions right and then just missed the last 6 of them, but it would hurt. So I would encourage you all very, very strongly to finish, especially because, well, 2 things. First of all, there's never any of the unscored experimental questions at the end. There are some questions in the section that are unscored and experimental, but they're never in the last 5 questions. So in some way, the last 5 questions are more valuable because you know they count, unlike some of the others. And on top of that, if you miss a question, the next one's easier. And if you miss a bunch of questions in a row, the first question you missed might have been fairly hard, but by the time you get to that 5th one in a row, it was probably not very hard. And if you had only just had a few seconds of time for it, maybe you could have gotten it right really quickly. And since it is a very easy question, it's probably going to hurt your score pretty badly. So runs of significant numbers of non-answered questions at the end of a section, while not completely fatal, are really bad. That's what I'll say about that. Try to work your pacing to where you finish. Rory is typing. Yeah, great. So really, you can't have the 5-minute questions, you can't have the 6-minute questions, and sooner or later there's going to be something you can't answer no matter how much time you spend, and you just have to let it go. You do. Stubbornness is going to kill you if you can't get past it. If you're a sort of perfectionist who can't let go, this is not going well for you. This is especially true because when you're doing well, most of the questions you get are going to be hard. What's hard? Well, one thing I like to tell my students is that everyone fails the GMAT, because apparently I'm really bad at my job. No, not because I'm bad at my job, because it's the nature of the test. Everyone fails the GMAT, okay? And here's what I mean by that. The computer is trying to find a level of question that you can get right roughly 60% of the time, which means that you're going to get about 60% right answers on your test, and I can tell you that right now, with tutoring, without tutoring, if you're doing well, if you're not doing well, about 60% right. Now, I don't know where you went to school, but I'll tell you where I went to school, 60 was an F. So this test never feels awesome. You never walk out like, oh man, I killed that, I didn't miss anything. And by the way, if you do walk out like that, you probably have some irrational confidence there, and you're probably in for a little bit of a fall when you find out that actually, no, you probably missed about 40% of the questions, just like almost everybody else. It's just the nature of the beast. So, there's a lot of checking your pride at the door that has to happen here to be successful in a test where success means 60% right answers, but that is the way it goes. Now, this also means I can't tell you how many right answers you need. Like if you're saying, oh, well, how many can I afford to miss and get a 700? The answer is, I don't know. Couldn't tell you. Not, again, because I haven't done my job, because I have. The problem is that the number of right answers and wrong answers is not the only thing that goes into your score. It's also the difficulty level of the questions you faced. So there isn't a specific number that I can give you. You just have to do your best and hope that, chips fall where they may. You faced enough challenging questions and did well enough on them that you get that score. Now, how do I make sure I face enough challenging questions? Well, your floor is very important. If you are awesome at 700 level questions, but you make frequent careless errors on 500 level questions, sadly, you will probably never see the 700 level questions. The test will just conclude that you're not capable of even getting to them. You can't do the 500 level stuff. Why should I show you the 7s? So make sure that your floor is really, really solid here. Obviously, I want us to get up to the high levels. I want to talk about a bunch of 700 level questions, and we will. Especially in the second half of the course, we will talk about a lot of really high level stuff. But if your floor is not rock solid, none of that's going to make a whole lot of difference for you. So we're going to talk about how to get there and how to really solidify your foundations. We're going to give you lots of tools to do that, and make sure you make good use of them, because if you don't, kind of nothing else matters. All right? Okay. So again, does anyone have any questions about the test so far? Anything you want to know about the GMAT? Anything at all? Usually, like, no one has a question here, and then I get to the break and like 4 people want to ask questions, and they say, oh, I didn't want to bore everyone during class with my stupid question, and they all have the same stupid question, you know, stupid question. So if you have a question that's probably not stupid, please ask. No? Ronak? Siddharth? Multiple attendees are typing. How much has the order of the exam affected scores? Oh, hey, Keenan, you can see me? You can hear me? Really? Are we actually all good with Keenan now? Siddharth, not very much is the data that they had. It doesn't make a big difference on the whole what order you take the sections in, which is why they're pretty cool with it. Like, they're like, whatever, man, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. So if it feels better, if you make, floats your boat, you do whatever you want, or at least one of 3 options. My personal take on that, by the way, in case you're wondering, is I would probably start with my tougher of quant or verbal, because that way, once I get out of the way, it's kind of all downhill from there. Oh, you mean the first few questions? Nah, I don't think that's really true either, because remember, it's 20 questions, but sometimes you lie. So look, if you mess up the first few questions, then yes, for a while the adaptive is going to think, hey, maybe this guy's kind of dumb. But after a while, if you get a whole bunch of right answers on the dumb questions, the test is like, maybe I just made a mistake. Maybe this guy was lying. Maybe he's not actually dumb. And there is enough time for you to recover. Like, it's not great to miss the first few questions, but it's not really great to miss questions, period. And the test is long enough for you to recover from a bad start if it was actually not representative of who you really are. So I know there's some people out there saying, mostly at one of our competitors, I won't say which competitor, but it rhymes with Applin. Anyway, they've been saying for some time that you should spend extra time on the first few questions. That's not really true, as it turns out. All you're going to really do is get yourself maybe in over your head on some of the really hard questions and behind on time. You will then spend a whole bunch of time missing the really, really hard questions, and you will end up right back where you started, but behind on time. So I would try to keep a relatively even pace. I would try to get right answers where I can get them, and I would try to stay on that 2-minute average, pretty much all the way through the test. Is the GMAT curved, Daniel? Yes, it is curved in the sense that the percentiles of the sections change. The scaled scores of the percentiles do not. The percentiles change. So I don't know that that means I should focus on verbal, because what I'll say about this is the following. The maximum score on each side is a 51. A point on either section, quant or verbal, moving you closer to 51, is worth exactly the same in your composite score. So I will say that if you're sitting there at 49 quant and you're like, this is only the 70th percentile, and then you're sitting there at 40 verbal and you're like, oh, this is the 80th or 90th percentile or something like that, and you're thinking, well, I really need to fix that 70th percentile quant that's a 49 more than I need to fix that verbal that's a 40 but it's a higher percentile. Well, you're wrong. Because that 40 can gain 11 points on its scale up to 51. That math can only gain 2 points up to 51. You would have a lot more room to improve your verbal. So I would suggest looking at those numbers on the 51-point scale, maybe even a little more than I look at the numbers on the percentile scale, as the thing that really will tell you where you should be spending your time. Okay, Daniel? Now, the other thing I will say is your school may vary, and some schools care very much specifically about the math scaled score, depending on what school you're looking at. So, you know, if you're not sure, you have to talk to your specific school and see what they say. What I'm giving you is the sort of true on average advice, but I can't speak to every single business school that exists. Yes, you do get your GMAT score right away after you take your test. You take your test, you finish it, up pops a score, and they say, would you like to keep this score or not? And if the answer is no, then you can just go delete, and it will disappear, and no one will ever even know that you took it. It doesn't even go down as an unscored test. It just goes down as you were never here. You were never there at all. Don't delete your score if it's anything even close to where you want to be. That should only be reserved for like the utterly bombing case. And yes, you can reinstate it, but they will charge you for the privilege. Isn't that right? I believe they're charging for the privilege, Siddharth. Can you confirm? Yes, of course they do. Of course they do. If you change your mind, they're like, yes, great, pay us, give us money, do anything for money. They're real whores about it. Okay. Any other questions? I would recommend you keep your score if it's in the ballpark, because I think that having a score that's reasonable when you do go for the retake, first of all, can give you a certain amount of comfort to know that you've got that as a floor, like it can't be any worse than this score. Even if you were to bomb it, you'd just cancel and you'd still have that original score to fall back on. And I think that's somewhat comforting. And schools are generally going to take your highest score, okay? Most schools, and again, I can't speak to all of them, but generally speaking, if you get 2 scores, schools will just take whichever the higher one is. So there's really no problem with having a slightly lower score on your resume. It just shows that you maybe underestimated the test the first time around and then you worked hard the second to get what you needed. So I would not be concerned about having a slightly lower score than I wanted on my resume, as long as I eventually put up one that was my goal. And I just think it takes the pressure off, like I said. So I like to have that. Okay, anything else? Daniel's typing again. Happy to take all these questions right now. These are great questions. How did they come up with a score of 51? That's a good question. Originally, the scale was supposed to be up to 60. And I believe that it still says out of 60 if you actually look on the scale. So my scores were 51 out of 60, which is weird because that is actually the maximum. They basically planned themselves at a scale up to 60, and then they ended up realizing they didn't need it for various sort of test-makery reasons. They didn't need that much distinguishing power among the top levels of the test, and so they ended up leaving the scale up to 60 but only using up to 51. Honestly, for any more detailed reasons about like why exactly they didn't need beyond 51, you'd have to talk to GMAT. I don't have a better answer for that question. But just kind of what they ended up needing. Now remember, it's 30 questions, though I will say this, they're not all weighted the same. Some are easier, some are harder. So you can't be like, oh, 30 questions, 30 points, because it's not quite that simple. Okay, one more time. Any other questions right now? Daniel again? Just a smiley face. Okay, so let me answer one question that some of you may have thought about or be thinking about at some point or another for this test, which is, okay, like, I get it, you know, math, verbal, whatever, but what is the GMAT testing? Like, yeah, I know, special triangles, combinatorics, but do I really care that much about whether the future leaders of the world have, like, mastery of special triangles and, like, excellent grammar? Like, is that what a future CEO is supposed to have, and that's what I care about? No, no, of course not. That's what secretaries are for, right? I mean, let the secretary figure it out. I'm not interested as the CEO in that kind of garbage. So then why? Why, people think? Why do they want these things from me? Why is this the test for business school? Why aren't they asking me some business stuff, right? If you're thinking that way, and I know a lot of people do, I think it's reasonable, but I also think that it shows something of a misunderstanding of what this test is really all about, and perhaps even deeper, maybe something of an understanding about learning, misunderstanding about learning itself and knowledge and what I'm really even talking about when I talk about those things. I think that a lot of people have this idea that learning is this sort of singular monolithic thing, that knowledge is kind of a binary where either I know it or I don't. And it's kind of a reasonable way to think of it, except that it's wrong. It's not true. And the people who study this, cognitive psychologists, developmental psychologists, have looked very closely at what we think of as learning and knowledge and said it's not actually a singular thing at all. When we talk about learning, it's actually a collection of related things that we mean. One particularly influential developmental psychologist by the name of Bloom actually has argued that there's a hierarchy involved in learning of not one or two or three, but 6 related things. He called it Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives, and it looked suspiciously like a triangle. But Bloom's triangle of educational objectives didn't have the same ring to it, I guess. And Bloom said, these are the 6 things that I mean when I say that I know something, or that I've learned it. At the most fundamental and basic level, learning is about remembering and understanding the rules. You know, it's about knowing that the formula for the area of a circle is pi r squared. Remembering that. And of course, understanding that formula, understanding what pi represents and what r is and what a circle looks like and what it means to square something. You know, just on a fundamental and basic level, I need to remember and understand the rules, or I can't say that I've learned anything. But you know, says Bloom, that's not really enough either, right? Because there's tons of people out there who can tell you that the area of a circle is pi r squared and can understand on a fundamental level what those things are, but still could not solve a GMAT circle problem to save their lives, right? So there's got to be more to it than that, and Bloom says, of course there is. Because above this remembering and understanding, learning also means analyzing and applying. It's about being able to look at a problem and analyze it and understand what kind of a problem this is and what sorts of approaches we might need to use, and then to take those approaches and actually apply them to the problem in the right way in order to use them to get to a solution. And that's very important. And it's a very big thing that the GMAT is interested in testing, not only whether you remember the rules, but also that you can take them and you can recognize the circle problem and know what rules to use in that circle problem and know how to apply those rules in order to actually get right answers. And again, you might say, okay, well that seems very reasonable and that sounds like enough. That's what learning is. And again, Bloom says, not quite. There's even more to it than that. And at the very highest levels, Bloom says, it's not about any of those things. At the very highest levels, learning is about evaluating and creating. It's about taking a problem that's not exactly like anything you've ever seen before, that you don't exactly have a rule that you can apply to it and get yourself an answer. It's about evaluating that problem, about figuring out what makes it tick and what it's really testing, and looking at all of the tools that you've got, none of which quite fit on this problem, and evaluating those too, and figuring out how you can combine them all in a new way that no one has exactly shown you, that you've never done before, and that you can create something new, and you can build the tools you need to solve this problem. And that evaluating and creating, that is the highest level of learning and the highest level of knowing anything. That's the mastery of a topic. And if you think about it, that's exactly what I care about for the future leaders of the world. So you see, I don't need the future leaders of the world to solve the problems that we already know how to solve, right? I need the future business leaders and the future leaders in general to solve the problems that we don't know how to solve. Hell, to solve the problems we've never even thought of yet. You know? That's what I need you to do if I'm going to entrust you with all of this power and leadership in the world. That's the highest level of learning, and that is what the GMAT is really testing. In fact, if you look at GMAT questions at different levels, this maps very nicely with the score scale. If I look at a 400 level question, most of the time the 400 level questions are just remembering and understanding the rules. They're just as simple as, hey, did you know the area formula for a circle? You did? Great, here, have a cookie. You know, and you get some points. But you start to get up to 500s, 550 is the average on the test, maybe even low 600s. That's not going to cut it anymore. You're going to have to show me that you can analyze and you can apply. And you're going to have to show me some strategy. But even there, that's not getting you a 700. A lot of people have this idea that they think they understand the difference between the 600 scoring, person and the 700 scoring person. And this idea goes sort of like this. They say, okay, so I understand. Like the 600, 650 score, they look at a certain problem and they don't know how to do that problem. 700 scorer looks at the same problem and they go, oh, I do know how to do that problem, and that's really the difference, right? And, it's a nice story, but it's false. In my experience, it's just not true. The story actually goes a little more like this. The 600 student, 650 student, looks at a certain problem and goes, I don't know how to solve that. 700 level student looks at the same problem and goes, yeah, you know what? I don't know how to solve that either. And the difference is what happens next, because what happens next is then the 700 level student goes right ahead and gets the right answer. And that sounds ridiculous. It sounds incredible. It sounds oxymoronic, like a contradiction in terms. What I just told you is that the thing that separates the 700 level students from the 600 level students is the 700 level students get the right answers on the problems they don't know how to solve. And as crazy as that sounds, not only is it true, it's possible, and it's something that we can teach. And a lot of what we're going to do in this course, especially in the second half of this course, is about exactly that thing. It's about how to approach a problem you don't know how to solve so that you can still make progress, so that you can still figure it out, so that you can create the tools that you need to solve it anyway. Okay? And that is absolutely a critical and high-level skill that we're interested in. So ultimately, going back to the question of what is the GMAT really testing, I want to know if you're going to be successful in business school and beyond. And that's it. That's the one job of every question on the test, is to basically put people into two buckets. The people who deserve to be in business school and the people who should not be in business school. And that's it. That's all this test is for. But the best way to test that is not to ask you a bunch of business questions. Because ultimately, I care much more about how you think than what you know. So ultimately, the best way to test this is to create high-level problem-solving problems. And it turns out that to do that, I need a system of rules. And as much as possible, I'd like a system of rules that is a level playing field, something that everyone taking this test should know how to do, should have mastered at some point in their lives, has demonstrated basic capability to do. Something like, I don't know, the English language. I assume we all speak English, and the test is only offered in English. So reading comprehension and, arguments and grammar, these are things that we all should have a reasonable baseline facility with. Or middle school math. We all graduated middle school. I think it's a fair level playing field. But ultimately, those are just my tools as the question writer. They're not my goal. My goal is not ultimately to see if you can do the middle school math. I assume you can do the middle school math. What I want to see is if you can use that to solve a problem-solving, critical thinking, strategically oriented problem. That's what this test is really about, and that's what we're going to see as we go through this course, is how to take these foundations, and we will work on the foundations, but that's not enough. But we're going to get to a point where we have the foundations, and we're going to assume you have the foundations, and then we're going to build on them. And that's what I'm really most interested in. Now, what do you think about that? Any thoughts? I've been monologuing for a while. Does this make sense? Yes, we're all going to crush this. I like Ben's attitude. Yes, Ben, I am with you. We're going to kill it together. Other thoughts? Great enthusiasm. Okay. I'm glad that you like it. I mean, you know, I think it's a question that's reasonable to ask, and I think it's important for us to understand what this is really about, because if you don't, then that's where you go out and you memorize all the fundamental rules and you get yourself a nice solid 550, because that's about how far that will take you, you know? So if you understand that there's more to it, then maybe you will approach it in a better way. Keenan is typing. Yeah, absolutely. What you're talking about is data sufficiency. I think you missed this because I know you were having some technical difficulties, but we have a book about halfway through specifically and completely dedicated to data sufficiency. And it's one of my favorite lessons. It really is. It's super fun. I get to be so evil to you. I just get to spend the whole 3-hour lesson just tricking the hell out of everybody. It's awesome. But we do need to spend a couple weeks going over the fundamentals of math, things like arithmetic, things like algebra, before that lesson makes sense for us to cover, because otherwise I'm tricking you with math you don't know, and then it's not really a whole lot of fun. So bear with us for the next couple weeks as we get those foundations of math, and just kind of do your best on the data sufficiency, but recognize that, you know, once the foundations are solid, we will definitely give it a lot of attention, and we'll make sure that you really understand how to play through those tricks. Why is it a necessary thing to test? Well, it's a business skill. Okay? It's absolutely a business skill to understand what information you need. In fact, many years ago, I actually did an interview for some of the top consulting firms. I was very interested after law school. Before I started up the tutoring, I looked for a while at going to a strategy consulting firm like McKinsey or Boston Consulting, and I interviewed with both of those companies. And I don't remember which one it was, but one of them used to have on its website this interview prep, and the interview prep was really cool. It was very interesting because what it was is there was this case that you had to solve, and there were all these questions you could ask, and that you and your hypothetical team could explore. And you could get answers to those questions that you would then use to sort of solve the case. But the really clever thing about it was there were lots and lots of questions you could ask, but each one of them had a time cost attached to it. If you want this answer, it'll take you 1 day to get it. If you want that answer, it'll take 3 days to get it. And you had a month in total. And when you used up your month, however many questions you got answers to, well, guess what? That's what you've got to work with, and you've got to answer the case using that. So if you asked the wrong questions, and if you sought the wrong information, you were going to do a crappy job answering your case. They weren't going to want to hire you. Why? Because time is a finite resource, knowledge is a finite resource, money is a finite resource, and in order to be successful in business, we can't just solve the problem. We have to solve the problem efficiently. We have to understand what resources we really need and what resources we can do without. And, you know, that is 100% a business skill. So I'm all in on the idea that data sufficiency is an appropriate thing for this test to address. Renisha, that is an excellent, excellent question, and I'm going to answer it in just a few minutes. I'm still talking about the test right now. Does anyone else have any questions about the test? And then I will jump into the course side of things. And Renisha, I promise I will give you an answer to that question shortly. Okay. Any other test questions at all? Okay. So, Renisha is asking about the course and our preparation for the test, and I think those are excellent questions. And the second unit of this today's lesson is to talk about that, to talk about the course and what to expect from the course, and of course what the course will expect from you. So, first thing about the course is that we are very interested in this higher order thinking stuff. This is not a surprise given what I just said about Bloom's taxonomy, but the thing is, if the test is going to be tested in that way, then by God, that is how we're going to organize our course and our learning as well. We're going to learn how we need to crush what they want to throw at us. So we are going to give you a blueprint for higher order thinking, but we're going to give you a blueprint for every level of that. And we call that the Veritas Prep Pyramid, but I got to tell you, it looks suspiciously like a triangle if you ask me, okay? Because there it is. And you know, actually, now that I think about it, it looks kind of like Bloom's triangle, you know? And the bottom levels, we've got the remembering and understanding the rules, but we have a fancy name for that. We like to call it Skill Builder. You know, remembering and understanding the rules, we're building those basic skills, that foundation. On top of that, you've got the analyzing and applying. That's where the skills meet the strategy, and that's what we call it. And the top level, the evaluating and creating, well, we've got a clever name for that too. We call it Think Like the Test Maker, because so much of what you want to do, as we'll see as we go through this course, to actually create the tools you need, is to try to get into the headspace of what the test maker had in mind. Why did they ask this question this way? Nothing is by accident on the GMAT, so why did they choose these numbers? Why did they phrase it this way? What was the significance of these specific words? And if we can figure that out, it gives us a real leg up on the evaluating part of what this problem is all about so that we can then actually build the tools we need. And if you go through the lesson, you will see these little icons strewn throughout on various pages, highlighted at the top, the middle, possibly the bottom, and there'll be boxes where we'll give you little tips and strategies and things like that at each of these different levels. So, you know, you see a top of the pyramid box, and it's like precision in wording and clever wordplay, and it's talking about, you know, how the test maker tries to use sort of clever switches in terms to mislead you. Or you'll see a middle level, and it'll be about how to apply a certain thing like identifying conclusions to an actual question, something like that. And these will be strewn throughout the lessons. So as we go through them, there will be a number of high-level things to think about. Think Like the Test Maker is not just about getting questions right. That's almost beside the point to me. I don't care about right answers. That seems strange for somebody to say if they're a tutor, but I really don't. I care about right process. Ultimately, I care about the fact that you go about this the right way, because in the long run, that is going to lead to many more right answers than, you know, just trying to get the right answer on this question. And how to do that means that you have to ask, why was the right answer right? Not just what's the right answer, but why. And why was the wrong answer wrong? But also, why was the wrong answer tempting? What did they do to make this tricky? What did they do to try to mislead me? And how can I make sure that I won't get misled on the next question, and the next one, and the one after that? Okay? I've got another note about this a little bit later, but what we're trying to do is not just learn the rules, but learn the game behind the rules. As we go through, we'll see a number of these high-level themes. I'm not going to belabor them right now. They are in the slides I sent you. You know, abstraction, reverse engineering, misdirection, etc. Here's the thing, though. If you were to look through all of our lessons and you were to look for those little pyramids, you'd see lots of little top of the pyramid icons strewn throughout. You'd see lots of middle of the pyramid icons here and there and everywhere. You wouldn't see almost any bottom of the pyramid icons. And that's weird, right? I mean, the foundations are critical. You need the bottom of the pyramid. That's like the admission. You don't even get to play the game if you don't know the foundational stuff. So where have all the bottom of the pyramids gone, you might ask? And the answer is the skill builders. Each of our books, or almost all of the books, this book doesn't have a skill builder, but most of them do. At the start of each of those books, there's a section titled Skill Builder. And the skill builder of each lesson is where all the bottoms of the pyramids have gone. That skill builder is all of the fundamental rules and, you know, memorization bits and everything else that you need to know have gone. Okay? They're all there, and the skill builder is everything that you need to know in order to be successful when you come into class. It is expected, and it's very important, that you will do the skill builders before the class for which they are given. Okay? So for instance, if you have not yet done the arithmetic skill builder, you're going to have a fun tomorrow because it's due Thursday. Thursday, right? Today's Tuesday? Yeah, today's Tuesday. It's due Thursday. When we do the arithmetic class, you need to have already completed the arithmetic skill builder before you walk in there. If you don't, I can assure you that you will not have a fun arithmetic lesson. You will struggle, it will suck, you will definitely not get the most out of it because I am going by necessity to assume that you have completed the skill builder stuff. Now, if you haven't, and I recognize that you're struggling, I will do my very best to help you out. I really will. But we got 29 people on the roster and 21 people in the room currently, and you know, if one person didn't do their job and didn't do their skill builder and they're struggling and everyone else is ready to move forward, I can't and won't sacrifice this class to that. So I will do my very best to help you, but there are limits on what I'm able to do if you don't do your job. Now, we're the only company that does something quite like this. It is in the hard copy book. It is in the downloadable ebooks as well. It is in your student login. Under the resources tab, there is a link to skill builders. Okay? So they are available there. If you're having any trouble finding them, say by tomorrow, send me an email or send the main office an email, probably even better because they're more on the tech side than I am and they can, you know, handhold you through it. But check in the resources tab of your student login. They're in both the print and the ebooks. There is not a singular place, Ben, that lists all the homework, but I'm going to explain it to you right now, and it's pretty simple actually, so I'm going to make it real clear, okay? So there are skill builder lessons. There's also actually printed skill builders, and I think there's skill builder quizzes as well. There's a whole bunch of different stuff for the skill builders, Keenan, and the reason is that we want to always give you the way that you learn best, whatever that may be, whether it's auditory, visual, print, spoken, whatever. So they're all going to kind of cover the same material. I would at least make sure, though, that you look at the skill builders in the books, whether, again, it's ebooks or printed books. So make sure you look at those. And then if you want to supplement that with a video or a quiz or something like that, be my guest. The skill builders have to be done before class and however long it takes, all right? If you come in here and you haven't done them, no one's going to throw you out. No one's going to say, nah, you can't be here, man. You got to leave. But you're not getting the most out of it. And you got to know that you've put in a lot of time and a lot of money committed to this class, and you're wasting some of that, some portion of it, if you don't do this part of it. How long is it going to need? It depends. If you go through those skill builders and you have the foundations, you know, you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, yeah, decimals, fractions, got it, awesome. You might go through the whole skill builder in 10 minutes. Just flipping pages, flip, check, you know, maybe 2 minutes, I don't know. How fast can you flip pages? On the other hand, if you go in here and you're like, oh man, multiplying decimals, I really don't remember that. Oy, I need a lot of practice on this multiplying decimals. You might spend hours. You might spend lots of hours. You might spend 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. And you know what? So be it. Because the goal in the skill builder is mastery, okay? The goal in the skill builder is to get to a point where you are 100% confident in your ability to do all of that stuff and all of that skill builder. And again, it's on you and it's putting the trust on you to be honest with yourself and do what it takes to get to that point. And again, for some people that's 10 minutes, for some people that's 8 hours. Know yourself and do what you need to do. The advantages of this are several. There is every class pretty much one topic, and therefore there's one skill builder for each class. Yes. The books, you know, the next one is arithmetic, there's one skill builder for that, the next one's critical reasoning, skill builder for that, the next one's algebra. We're going in exactly the order of the books with just a couple small exceptions. And when I get to the exceptions, I'll let you know very far in advance. So one skill builder per class, one topic per book. Okay? Very simple. We're going to keep this whole homework thing as clear and straightforward as we possibly can. There are a lot of advantages to doing it this way, and we're the only company, as far as I know, that does it quite this way with skill builders like this. And we didn't always. You know, when I was first in Veritas for the first couple years, okay, thank you, Akil. Yeah, I thought the ebooks were under the resources tab of your student login. That is where they are. And they have skill builders in them, right, Akil? They should. So, should be the first 50 to 100 pages of each of the ebooks. Almost every ebook has a skill builder. Good, great, all right. Good, it's just how I remembered it. We are all set on that. We didn't always do the skill builders this way. The first couple years I was at Veritas, we just tried to do everything in class and not really ask a whole lot outside of class. And it was problematic. I mean, first of all, people would come in at wildly different levels in the class. And look, some amount of this as a tutor, my job is to handle and manage a class where people are at different levels. And that's fine, I can do that, I'm a professional. But there are limits, you know? And if one person is sitting in the class going, wait, how does multiplication work? And another person is going, come on, let's see the high level, 700 level stuff. At a certain point, it becomes impossible if they're too far apart to really say things that are going to satisfy both of them. And there's always going to be something where one of the two people is going to be sitting there not getting valued for their time and just not really having a great experience. Beyond which, if you do think about getting value for your time, one thing that I think a lot about is you guys have a lot of options, right? You don't have to be here. You could be doing something else. You could go to another company. You could read a book. You could watch a pre-recorded video. You could watch a cat video. I don't know. You could do all kinds of things to prepare for the GMAT instead of this. And this is a lot of commitment in terms of your time and money. So one thing I always think about is what is it that I can do? What am I doing that adds value? What can I give you that you can't get with some other company or reading a book or watching a pre-recorded video? And every time I've thought about this for many years, and I've done this for way too long, I've always come to the same conclusion. No, the skill builder is not the entire arithmetic book. I'll take that in a minute. I've always come to the same conclusion, and that conclusion is that the top level stuff is where I add the most value. In terms of the bottom of the pyramid, in terms of remembering the rules, there's nothing I can say about the area of a circle formula that's all that much better than you just reading the area of a circle formula. There's just not. You know, I'm no better than a book there. But when we talk about strategy, when we talk about problem solving, when we talk about that high level craziness of solving the problems you don't know how to solve, I've never really read a book that talks about it in a way that is as effective as what I think that we can do collaboratively in this class. And so the more time that I am able to spend on those high-level topics and that critical thinking at a top level, the better it will be for everyone. And the more that you guys master the skill builders coming in here, the more that I can give you value for your money. And that's one of the reasons why I think that these are absolutely the best class available, because we do get to spend more time than any other class doing stuff that's actually going to help you get that 700. Now, Carla, to answer your question about the skill builder, it starts on page 13. It does not run the whole book. It runs anywhere from 50 to 100 pages. At a certain point, the pages will stop saying skill builder and start saying lesson. Okay? Once it starts saying lesson, that's where you need to stop reading, because we're going to do the lessons together in class. In fact, that is the next slide here. The lessons are not meant for you to do before class. In fact, I'd prefer that you not, because there's a lot of fun reveals that I'm going to give you that you will spoil if you've read about them in the lessons. Also, I've moved things around in the lessons on the slide somewhat, and so you'll get a little confused if you've done the lessons. I've even tweaked some of the problems slightly, and it can be really like a little weird if you almost saw this problem, but it's a little different. So don't do the lessons before class, okay? Please do not. Just do the skill builders, and then we're going to come in here together every Tuesday and Thursday night, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to do the lessons learning by doing. All right? Now, learning by doing means that a lot of what this is going to be is problems. My least favorite part of the course is where I stand up here and lecture. You don't need a second screen. We're going to have the slides on the screen. The slides are my version of the lessons. They're similar to the book's lessons, but they cover everything, so you don't need a book open in front of you. There may be a couple times I will say you might want to have it open because, for instance, when we do the reading comp, you may want to be able to flip around in the reading yourself, something like that. But as a general matter, everything you need is going to be on these slides right next to me, right here, and showing right up on your screen, okay? Okay, so you generally will not need the books open in the lessons. With a couple of exceptions, I will let you know. Standing up here and monologuing is not my favorite part of this class. It's actually my least favorite part, and unfortunately today is my biggest monologue day of them all. But most of what we're going to do in these lessons is not that. Most of what we're going to do is we're going to work problems. We're going to do them through a variety of approaches. In some cases, I'm going to sit you guys all down. I'm going to start a timer and a poll, and I'm going to say 2 minutes, everyone do this question, and you're going to vote in the poll, and at the end, we'll talk about it. Other times, we'll have an open floor discussion. I'll put the question up. We'll just kind of talk about it together. You'll make comments. I'll ask for specific things. You'll give them to me, hopefully. In other cases, I may even go around the room. I may call on particular students. I may say, hey, Cecilia, I haven't heard a lot from you tonight. Why don't you talk to me about this one? And I'll do that. I have been accused in some of the reviews I've received over many years of putting people on the spot and making people uncomfortable. And I want to let you know that I'm sorry in advance if I do that. It's certainly not my intention at all, to make you uncomfortable. And if you have any concerns, Cecilia, you're great. I was using you as an example. Sorry, it's just picked a random name I could see on the screen. You've been fine. Very funny, though. I'm not trying to make anyone uncomfortable, all right? Really, I'm not. If you have any concerns, if you have anxiety and you're worried about being put on the spot, please come talk to me. You have my phone number. You've got my email address. Call me, text me, email me, and we will figure this out. And we'll find a way for you to participate that is as painless as possible, you know? But I do want you to participate in any event, because that's the one thing that's kind of non-negotiable for me, because maybe it's my law school background and the Socratic method, I don't know, but it is very much my sincere belief that people will learn better if they participate, if they jump in, if they ask questions, if they try the problems, if they vote in the polls, you know, if maybe they make a mistake out loud in front of everyone and they test their ideas in the crucible of fire, as it were. And I've just seen so many cases where that makes such a big difference. And ultimately, look, I got 2 goals for this course, all right? 2 goals. My number 2 goal for this course is for you guys to have a really great experience. We'll have a lot of fun together, and you write me a lovely Yelp review at the end, okay? That's my number 2 goal for this course. But you know, my number 1 goal for this course is for you to get a good score on this test. And that's it. And hey, look, I got those 2 goals. And I really, really hope that I can achieve both those goals. I do. I love a good Yelp review. But if I have to make a choice, if it's got to be one or the other, I'm getting you a good score on that test. That is number 1 for me, and no question. So, you know, I will try to make this as painless as possible, but above all else, I'm going to do what I think I need to do to make sure that you get what you need out of this course to be successful on the test. And that's why participation is kind of a non-negotiable for me. Keenan, if you're having issues with specific problems, the best recommendation is that we have live office hours available every week. And you should go to them, because we will have instructors there who would be delighted to talk to you about the problems that you're struggling with. If you do that and you're still a little confused, you're welcome to send me an email, okay? And I will try to respond to that rapidly. If you have lots and lots and lots of questions, if you send me an email with 20 questions in it, I would probably suggest that we set up some individual tutoring time so that we can go over that properly and live. But if you got, hey, this one question's driving me nuts, I went to the office hours, I didn't really like the explanation, just send me an email, I'll take care of it. What's the best way to clarify the questions we may have after class or while doing skill builders? Now I will say, every one of these questions has a full written and in many cases video solution on your student login. So, you know, if you're really unclear about a question, that would be the first place to go. Try and make sure you read the explanation, see if that helps. But then, you know, again, try the office hours, email me. We'll give you whatever you need and whatever way you need to make sure that you understand this. We want to do whatever we can. You know, if you're putting in the effort and the time, and obviously you've put in a lot of money to this, we want to make sure that you get what you need. Stephen, if you're doing everything you just said, you're not going to have time for anything else, okay? Because I haven't even got to the homework yet. I haven't even told you how much time commitment this is, but hold on to your butts, because this is not a small time commitment we're about to ask for here, okay? Look, I got one more thing to say about the lessons, and that is, as we're doing them, no shame if you get an answer wrong, because again, I said this a little while ago, I don't actually care if you got it right or wrong. I don't care about right answers at all, because this question that you just missed, if you missed it, it's not going to be on your test. The only question that's going to be on your test, and therefore the only question that I care about, is the next question, okay? You see, I'm just like Annie. You know, tomorrow, tomorrow, I love you, tomorrow. Okay, I can't sing. And I don't have red hair, and I'm not a cute little girl, but whatever. Details, I am just like Annie, okay? I really am. And all I care about is the next question. So in every one of these cases, the thing that we need to think about is, what did I learn from this question that will help me on the next one? What did I learn? What patterns can I see? What strategies should I be using? What approach was the right one? Not what is the right answer. I mean, you know, the right answer, all the other stuff is more important than that, okay? I'd much rather have a right process than a right answer, because in the long run, the right process will lead to more right answers down the road. Think about that, and I will always give those takeaways. Oop, another guest. After class, there's two things that are homework. The first is not actually called homework, but it is. It's called You Oughta Know. And the You Oughta Knows are not present in every lesson, but they're present in a handful. And they are additional lesson-style material that, surprise, surprise, you ought to know. And for whatever reason, we have not decided to devote class time to this material. Perhaps it's a little bit more unlikely to show up, or a little more specifically high level. Perhaps it's very similar to something we did in class, and we just could not devote class time to this little nuance. And we feel like if you read it on your own, you'll be fine. For instance, in the word problems, we cover work rate problems in the word problem lesson, but we don't cover distance rate problems. The distance rate problems are in the You Oughta Know. They're similar enough that if you read the You Oughta Know and understand the couple differences, I think you'll be fine at the distance rate problems. But if you don't read the You Oughta Know, there are a couple key differences, and you won't know those differences, and you'll probably really struggle. So make sure you read the You Oughta Know sections after class, the class for which they're given, but before you do the actual homework problems, since after all, the homework may also address the You Oughta Know material. Okay? They're usually short, and again, they're things that we've been through this a number of times, and we feel comfortable that if you read about them on your own, you will be just fine. Please just make sure you do that. Okay? And then we get to the actual homework. And there is a lot of actual homework, like 100 questions for some of these books of actual homework. And these problems need to be done after the class for which they're given. Don't attempt them beforehand. And they need to be done within 1 week. It's not like the homework from today is due Thursday. That's crazy. It's like the homework from today is due next Tuesday, and homework from Thursday is due next Thursday, etc. Now again, no one's going to check it at the door and grade you and not let you come into the room if you haven't done the homework. But I am going to assume that you've mastered these steps and these processes and these strategies, because then I may build on them. You know, when I do reading comprehension and then there's homework, the next week's advanced verbal. And guess what? I may use some of the reading comprehension ideas in advanced verbal. Or I may do algebra and expect you to know the algebra when I do geometry and I build on the algebra. The You Oughta Know sections are immediately after the lesson. And the homeworks are immediately after that. In the lessons, it goes skill builder, lesson, You Oughta Know, homework. In exactly that order, 1, 2, 3, 4, in exactly the order that I've described it in the slides. So you have 1 week to do the homework. Every homework question has a full explanation, written, in many cases video, on your student login. And I want you to practice, again, strategies, not problems. So you need to take your time on these homeworks. Do 1 question, practice the right strategy, take however long it takes, go back to the lesson, go back to the slides, use any resources you want. It's open everything. Figure out the right way to do the problem, and then check it, right? Skill builder class, the things here I would say about that is class is the lesson, okay? Like class, lesson are not two separate things. Skill builder, class in which we do the lesson together. You ought to know homework. Okay? That's the order. And then next skill builder, and then next class. Skill builder class lesson, you want to know homework. Skill builder class lesson, you want to know homework. And again, class lesson, same thing. So skill builder class / lesson. Do the homeworks with proper strategy. Again, there's no submission for the homework, but if you have questions about it, bring it to the office hours, okay? Yes. That's right, Zahir. That's the order. Skill builder, class and lesson, you ought to know, homework, repeat, okay? Homeworks you can discuss in the, first of all, read the reviews, read the solutions and explanations online, take them to the office hours as needed. You can jump straight to the skill builders, I think. Take your time, practice good strategies, and repeat, okay? So the homework is not just do a problem. The homework is do the problem using a good strategy, using the right strategy. If you're not sure what that right strategy is, do whatever you need to do, open book, open notes, to get that right strategy, and do the problem with the right strategy. Then review the problem and the strategy. Think about what you learned from it that you can take to the next problem. If you missed it, put it in an error log. And if you did miss it, or if you struggled with it, or if you just spent way, way, way too long, then about a week later, you need to do it again. You need to go back to it. So first you need to learn how to do it, right? You need to review it. You need to see how you were supposed to do it. And then once you're comfortable with it, put it on a list, wait a week, do it again. If you miss it again, guess what? Go through the whole process again. Learn it again, get comfortable again, and then back on the error log, back on the list, wait a week, do it again. You haven't finished with this problem until you can pick it up a week later and still know very comfortably how this is supposed to work. Okay? Where you're not just memorizing that specific problem, but like that approach and that strategy comes naturally to you. That is the standard here. So this homework is going to take you a lot of time if you're doing it right. If you're flying through this homework in no time, you better be telling me you're getting all the answers right. Because if you're flying through it quickly and you're not getting all the answers right, well then you're just doing it wrong. I don't care that the answers are wrong. I care that the answers are wrong and you haven't done what you needed to then learn the right process so that won't continue. We will not be doing official guide problems in class because of copyright issues, but we do a lot of problems that are very similar to official guide problems. In many cases, things that are as close of a ripoff as we can manage without, getting sued. We generally will not have time to go over homework questions in class. There is a ton of material in here, guys. I am going to be really pressed for time to try to get through all the material in this test in 36 hours. I wish I had about 56 hours and I could do 10 extra hours of lesson time and 10 hours of homework. I can't. So that's where the office hours come in. The office hours are essentially the part of class where you go over the homework. They're just on a different day and you'll just have to go to them. But we'll do our best to make sure that you understand the processes, and then you do have all these other resources like the explanations online, like the office hours, like my email as needed, to make sure that you're getting it with this homework. All right? Now, I'm asking you for a lot here. You got skill builders, you ought to know, you got homework, you're obviously going to want to show up for class every time. And I do think that coming live to this class is better than just watching it on the recorded videos. So I encourage you to actually show up for class every time. In my experience, about half of you are going to not do that by the end and just kind of watch it later on video, and I think that's unfortunate. But I think that if you put in everything the right way, you ought to be spending at least 2 to 3 hours outside of class for every hour you're putting in class, in addition to, hey, you're going to be here in class, I hope, for 6 hours a week. So if you think about that, that's 6 hours a week in class, that's 12 to 18 more outside of class. All right? Keenan, I'm not really sure exactly what you're saying here about requesting something specific over the phone. Again, go to the online office hours, send me an email as needed. Of course, read the explanations, watch the video explanations for the question you need. Those are the best ways to get help with the problem, okay? But if you're spending 6 hours a week in class and 12 to 18 out of class, well, that's 18 to 24 hours a week that I'm asking you to put in here. And some of you may need more than that. And if that sounds like a part-time job to you, like, wait, you just asked me for 20 hours a week of my time? Well, great, you're paying attention. because this class is a huge commitment, all right? This is asking more of you than any other GMAT class out there, but here's the thing. I think that if you put in that time and that effort and you do this right, there is no other GMAT class that can compare. This is the best available preparation for the GMAT if you do it right, okay? So look, I get it. You have other things in your life. If you can't handle this class and you need to drop because it's just too much of a commitment, I hope I haven't scared you off, but I wanted to be realistic. It's better that I let you know now, and I am not joking about this. I'm not exaggerating. Greg, you were in my class a little bit before. Would you say that I'm exaggerating here? Yes, everything is in the pre-recorded videos, Brian. And so it'll be posted on your student login after a while. So Greg says I'm not exaggerating, and he was in my class for a little bit before. So it's true. This is a serious commitment. And if you do it right, it's worthwhile. Come to class, do the work. Thank you, Greg. He's such a great plant, isn't he? Everyone give a round of applause to our plant, Greg Benante. I'm kidding. He's a legit student, but he does make a good case. I appreciate it. One thing that I like to say to people is something that once upon a time somebody said to me. When I was just starting out law school, I went to the first week orientation, and they said, "Hey guys, welcome to Georgetown, welcome to law school. Let us know what let you know what the next 3 years of your life are going to be like. Party, study, sleep. Choose 2." And you know, they said that, and they weren't kidding. They were exactly right, and I knew people who chose every pair of options. I knew people who, partied and studied all through law school. I don't know if they ever slept. And I knew people who partied and slept, and I assumed they failed out. Didn't see them at graduation. And I knew a whole lot of people, including myself, who studied and slept and had no life for 3 years. Okay? Now, maybe you guys are past the age of partying. I don't know. But I would say that this same trifecta applies in the same way for the GMAT. Party, study, sleep, and you can replace party with, let's say, have any sort of a life, social life, whatsoever. Have fun for really the next couple months of your life. I've had so many students who've come to me after a month of this course and gone, "Oh my God, Anthony, my friends hate me right now because, they call me up on a Friday night and they say, 'Hey, we're going to go out to the bar and have some drinks. Come hang out with us.' And they go, 'I can't. I'm studying for the GMAT on a Friday night.' And their friends go, 'Oh my God, you square.'" Except they don't, because no one says square anymore, right? But like whatever the cool kids are saying, that's kind of like square for old fogies like me. It is amazing when you finally get to sleep, but I can't do that, Keenan. If you can, great, cool, good for you. If you can have a fun and exciting life for the next couple months and still study for this test, you will probably not sleep, but if you can make that work, then more power to you. For everybody else, I recommend study and sleep. And again, I am asking a big commitment here, and that's what it's going to take to meet that commitment. But I assume you're here because you think that it's worth it. All right? I'm here because I think that it's worth it too. A reasonable outcome, I will say this. I think that gaining in the vicinity of 100 points is a really successful outcome from tutoring. So, depends also where you start. Obviously, if you start at 720, you're not gaining 100 points. But, if you're sitting there in the low 600s and you're aiming for 7, I think that's a reasonable goal to set. Obviously, there's no guarantees, so much of this depends on what you put in. But we're going to give you the tools for that. And I've had a lot of people gain, in that range. I've had people gain more than that range. I've had people gain, more and less. I'll say this. The most I've ever seen anyone gain, anyone, is 230 points. Some number of years ago, probably about 5 years ago now, I had a student go from 510 to 740, and she went to MIT after she chose between MIT and Berkeley. But 510 to 740. That is the single biggest gain I have ever seen anyone produce on this test, ever. So if you're looking for 300 points, I think you're being unrealistic. Even if you're looking for 230, understand that's not an average case. That is literally the most extreme case I have ever seen in my life. So I would not count on something like that happening. On the other extreme, I have had students, as much as I hate it, gain 0. And I hate it. It drives me nuts. I do everything I can to avoid that. But, you know, if you do this as long as I have, not everyone is going to be successful. And it really does depend on a lot of things, including whether you put in the work and you do this the right way. So I'm hoping that I get a lot more 230s and a lot less zeros. Most people are probably going to fall somewhere very much in the middle of that. Does anyone have any other questions now about this course or preparing? I know somebody, was it Renisha, you were asking earlier about preparing. Did I answer your question? About the best ways to prepare? Good. Great. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. Failing to get any other questions about the course, this is the point where I tell you one other thing about the course, which is that there is always a break, usually of about 8 minutes, usually about halfway through the course. This is that time. We're going to take an 8-minute break, and I will see you after that. I'm going to start a timer. Goodbye for 8 minutes, everyone. And we're back. So, did everyone have a lovely vacation? Go somewhere nice? You, I don't know, get to the beach, anything fun like that? Somewhere exotic? Okay, no one wants to play along. All right, fine. Advice for test day. I would take them, but I would just stretch my legs. If you desperately need to go to the bathroom, I would run to the bathroom. Yeah, I hope you don't get long lines. Hey, tropical theme in the bathroom. That's something. All right, I'll take it. Okay. Look, I would encourage you to go to the bathroom before your test starts, and hopefully you're not going to run into these problems. But if you need to go to the bathroom, you're probably worse off sitting there desperately needing to go to the bathroom for a couple hours of your test than you are just trying to hustle going to the bathroom. But certainly don't plan to do anything bigger than that on your breaks. Otherwise, I don't have any particular thoughts. Anything else? Anyone think of any other pressing questions on the break? Sorry, I know that wasn't especially profound, but that's all I got. Okay, we told you that this class was Foundations of GMAT Logic, and by God, I'm going to give you some of that GMAT Logic stuff I promised you, and I'm going to deliver. So that's what the rest of our evening is about. Now, you might notice, if you are following along in the books, and I told you you don't need to, but you might notice that I've skipped a section. I skipped a section titled GMAT Question Types and Strategies. My video is not pausing a lot. I hope it's not actually pausing. Is everyone else good here? Okay, Renisha, I may give you my exact same one piece of troubleshooting advice, which is the only thing I know to tell you, leave and re-enter. I'm very sorry that that's happening. And in the future, you'll have to talk to customer support because I am not a tech person. Okay, so I've skipped a section in your book. Consider it your very first You Ought to Know section. In fact, I've written it as the You Ought to Know section in my slide deck. So you can take a look at that as you like on your own time. But I'm going to talk about logic because that's what you're all here for, and I feel like you deserve what you came for. So, as I jump into this, a word on abstraction, okay? Today's lesson for the rest of the evening is a little abstract. It's a step removed from anything that's an actual real live GMAT question, because what we're doing right now is we're trying to get the 50,000 feet view, and we're trying to get the stuff that is sort of underneath the questions, the foundations of them, the stuff from which the questions are made. And this means that there are not as many tangible examples to grab onto in this lesson. I'll try to give you a few, but I understand that that's challenging, all right? I do. There are costs and benefits, downsides and upsides to abstraction, and the big downside is that it's hard. It's hard to think about problems without a lot of tangible examples in specific context, and I do understand that and I recognize it. But I ask you to bear with me just for today, because if you do, those examples are coming. Starting really next Tuesday when we do critical reasoning, you will see what we're going to actually do with all of this stuff. But the advantage for me and for us right now to not getting too bogged down in those examples is that by divorcing ourselves from this context, by getting the step back, abstracted view, we are able to make big overarching principles. We're able to understand things that are valuable and true in not just one part of the test, but lots of parts of the test. And many of the things that we say today will pop back up throughout this course in various and sometimes surprising places. Most obviously this stuff relates to critical reasoning, but you'd be surprised how much of this is relevant to reading comprehension, data sufficiency, statistics and probability. It pops up in all kinds of places. Integrated reasoning, the analytical writing assessment, I could go on. So hang in, because the upside of the abstraction is worth it, and I promise that we will come back to all of these things as we continue through the course, and we will give examples as we do. Okay? All right. So the GMAT is a test about arguments. All right? There's a point in the book where it says something like 70 to 80% of all GMAT questions are arguments in one way or another. And I suppose that in order to understand the GMAT, what I really need to do is I need to understand what an argument is. And so I ask this question not rhetorically. I ask it for you. What does it mean when I say that I'm making an argument? What is that? What is an argument? Oops, kind of loud. Putting forward a point and supporting that point. Okay, that's a pretty good definition. Siddharth says a line of thinking with a conclusion supported by some information. Okay, conclusion's a term of art, but I think that's a pretty good definition as well. A couple of people are still typing. I'll give you a chance to jump in if you'd like to. Carla and Matt. Statements and reasoning that will support an idea, says Carla. Okay. You guys are kind of on it. This is good. Matt, you want to add anything to that? An attempt to influence someone's opinion with facts. Okay. That's an interesting one. There's a lot loaded up in those few words, Matt, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a few minutes. Here's the definition that I would give. And I think you guys were all right on, so this is absolutely not a criticism of any of your definitions. I would say an argument is a series of premises that attempt to establish a conclusion. Now, this involves a couple terms of art. What is a conclusion? Well, a conclusion is simply a statement that I wish to convince you to accept as true. And what are premises? Well, they are simply a set of statements that I am using in my attempt to convince you of the conclusion. Okay? And then when I say it that way, it is a series of premises that attempt to establish a conclusion. Does that definition make sense to you guys? Okay. And again, I think that's very consistent with what everyone said there. Now, given this definition of an argument, it's going to be very important for me to be able to break down what I've got and understand the different roles that my statements are playing. Because it really all is premises and conclusions and possibly some other stuff that I would call context that's just kind of some added on, not terribly useful stuff, but just fluff around the edges. Well, I was thinking about Socrates. That's context. Socrates is a man. Men are mortal. Those are premises, so Socrates must be mortal. That's the conclusion. It's important to make these distinctions. It's important to make these distinctions because the rules are different for the parts of an argument, depending on whether they're premises and conclusions. First of all, when we break down an argument, we need to understand that the most important part of that argument is the conclusion. Because if you think about it, the conclusion is the reason for being of the entire argument. If it were not for the conclusion, I wouldn't bother with any of it. The whole point is that I want to establish that conclusion, and I'm just using the premises as part of my attempt to do that. So when we want to understand an argument, generally speaking, we want to start first by finding the conclusion, since as the subtitle of this page says, conclusions are king. The conclusion is the most important part of the argument. That's one reason I want to be able to distinguish between premises and conclusions. It's not, however, the only one. Okay? Another reason is that the rules for treating premises and conclusions on the test are different. And the things that you're allowed to do with premises are not the same as the things that you're allowed to do with conclusions. In particular, this is very important, and this is the first of many times that I'm going to say this over the next 6 weeks. conclusions are absolutely debatable, okay? It is your job on the GMAT to debate conclusions, to question them, to try to strengthen them, weaken them, talk about what flaws they may have or what gaps may be involved in the process of reaching them or what assumptions they may entail. However, you cannot argue with premises. Any premise on the GMAT is infallible. Every premise is the word of God, and you may not question it, okay? And this is a pretty important distinction. Think about it. If your job is to argue with conclusions, but premises are infallible, well, man, if you mess that up, you're either going to end up not doing your job, or worse, you're going to defy God and argue with a premise, and your God will be an angry God, and this will not go well for you. You know? So it is very important, I hope you will agree, for us to be able to tell the difference between, on the one hand, a premise, and on the other hand, a conclusion. Make sense? Now, how do I do that? Well, if only this were middle school. In middle school, it was so easy. Everything was easy and simple in middle school, right? No one had any stress in middle school. Okay, wait, no, that's not how I remember middle school at all. It was a horrible and daunting period of my life. But let's not get personal. One thing was easy, at least, in middle school, finding conclusions, because everything was a 5-paragraph essay, and in every single one of those 5-paragraph essays, it always went introduction, support, 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 conclusion, you know? You get exactly 5 sentences. The first is an introduction, the last is the conclusion. Life was great, at least for essays. But the GMAT is not middle school. And I mention this only to mention and to make very, very clear that we cannot simply assume that the conclusion is at the end of the argument or perhaps the beginning in the form of an introduction. It's possible that it is. It's also possible that it's not. It could be at the end, it could be at the beginning, it could also be somewhere in the middle. So that whole middle school conclusion at the end thing is not a tool for the GMAT. Luckily, I've got some other tools for you for breaking down arguments. And the first is called indicator words. They're kind of transitions, and they're a part of the English language whose sole purpose in existence is to tell you what part of an argument you are looking at. That's all an indicator word is about. There are indicator words for premises. There are indicator words for conclusions. There's indicator words for other stuff like counter-arguments and continuations. And as we go through this course, we'll see lots of them. My intention today is not to give you a comprehensive list at all. My intention is just to introduce you to the concept and show you a few of them and how they work so that you can start to think about them. Now, the most important indicator words are, for obvious reasons, the conclusion indicator words. Words like therefore, thus, so, hence, consequently, or in conclusion. I know it's hard to believe, but if I say the words in conclusion, there's a chance, just a chance, I might be about to state a conclusion. Possibly. If I say thus, or so, or hence, or therefore, you're probably getting a conclusion next thing you read. And so that's going to be very important for you since, after all, conclusions are king. It is raining, so, conclusion indicator, the parade will be canceled. And that's how I do it. Now, you might think, since conclusions are the most important, that I'd be less interested in premise words. But it turns out that premise words are still pretty interesting to me, because we don't put premise words on every premise in our argument. In fact, we tend to only put a few premise words in our argument, and only if our premise is near the conclusion. What we're really doing is we're distinguishing the two. We're saying, hey man, the conclusion is probably somewhere around here, but this ain't it. And so when you see a premise indicator word, it directly tells you where a premise is, but it can serve as a pretty significant hint at where you might look for the conclusion. One structure that we often use is because premise, comma, conclusion. We also sometimes will say conclusion because premise. The parade will be canceled since it's raining. Conclusion, the parade will be canceled. Premise, it's raining. So you see how that works. Now there are many other indicator words, as I suggested. I'm not going to talk about them today. We will see them later on in the course. Any questions about indicator words? No? Okay then. Next. One of you, Matt, I believe it was, had a very interesting definition of an argument. He used the word opinion and the word facts. And he was using the word opinion as a proxy for conclusion, and he was using the word facts as a proxy for the word premise. By the way, if you do have a question, I'm not trying to talk over you, I just want to keep moving, but please ask your question and I will take it once it pops up. So I see a couple of people sort of start typing and then stop typing. Don't let me stop you, please, by all means, feel free to jump in. So you're using opinion as proxy for conclusion and facts as proxy for premise. And here's the thing. That's mostly true. In our arguments, premises tend to be things that are factual and uncontroversial in nature. Things like it's raining. This is something that is objectively verifiable. I stick my hand out the window and either it's wet or it's not. You know, maybe it's not raining, I'm just underwater, I don't know. But like probably it's fairly simple and fairly objective to evaluate whether that statement is true. That's the sort of statement that is likely to be a premise rather than a conclusion. On the other hand, things that are statements of opinion, especially things that are like a call for action, like we should do something or we ought to do something, this is inherently opinion. I could never prove as a factual matter that something should be the case, and that sort of thing tends to be conclusion. All right? Premises tend to be facts, and facts tend to be premises. Opinions tend to be conclusions, and this can be a useful tool. Now, I will caution you about this, that there are exceptions to this tool, especially in scientific arguments. We will have some cases in which the conclusions are statements of fact. Especially in philosophical arguments, you may have some cases in which the premises are opinions. But this is kind of an 80-20 rule, which is to say that 80% of the time it works every time, right? The other thing I'll say about this is, for any of these tools I'm about to give you, you don't just use it in a vacuum. You don't just use one of them. This works best when you take all three of the tools I'm going to give you holistically. You combine them all, you think about one and then another and then another, and you put it all together. Any one of them could fail or just be very difficult, but when you put it all together, you can be really confident about how your argument breaks down. Third tool, the why test. We're going to talk about an argument as a chain of reasoning from A to B to C. And if you think of an argument in that way, well then the conclusion is really the thing at the end of the chain, right? Like it's really the C in that A to B to C picture. And so if you think you have the conclusion, you ought to be able to ask the question why. Why is this true? How do I know this thing? And the argument has to at least attempt to answer that question. All right? If the argument doesn't even try to answer the why question about your statement, it doesn't even attempt to justify your statement in any way at any other point, then you're wrong. Then you don't have the ultimate conclusion of your argument. You don't have a conclusion at all, it seems. You probably just have some context or a premise or something like that because it's not at the end of the chain of reasoning. Now, on the other hand, even if your argument answers the why question about your statement, if your statement then turns around and points to the next thing down the line, your statement is still not the ultimate conclusion. It's still not the end of the chain. It may be a middle link in the chain. You may have the sort of B in that A to B to C analysis, you know, but it's not the ultimate conclusion of the argument. And generally speaking, when I ask these questions, what I'm looking for is that. I want the ultimate conclusion. So I need to be the end of the chain. If you're in the middle, you're what's known as an intermediate conclusion. Premise, it's raining. Conclusion, so the parade will be canceled. But not the ultimate conclusion, because then the fact that the parade will be canceled is why test, The Rotary Club will need to find another fundraiser for this year. Ultimate conclusion is that one. Intermediate conclusion, first premise. Make sense? Again, feel free to jump in if you have any questions or anything. Otherwise, I'll just keep trucking along. Bryson says yes. Keenan and Akil are typing. Yep. Keenan's typing a lot. Can I repeat what exactly? This is the ultimate conclusion based on the why. Why will we need to find another fundraiser? Because the parade will be canceled. Why will the parade be canceled? It's raining. Premise, intermediate conclusion, ultimate conclusion. Is that the part you needed repeated, Keenan? Okay. Yeah, the one thing I will ask is if you do have that sort of a question, if you want me to repeat something, try to be as specific as you can, because otherwise I'm like, do you want me just to start over at, hi, my name is Anthony, and just go from there, or what? Okay, so we've got a little drill here. I'm going to try and do this pretty quickly. And one other thing I'll say, let me ask you a question for everyone. I have this really bad habit. Oh, Daniel's got a quick question. Let me go back to the last example. I have this really bad habit while he's typing his question. I have this tendency to always want to say one more thing, to always want to do one more problem, and therefore to often run my classes 10 to 15 minutes late. And I'll try to never go more than 15 minutes late, but I do tend to run a little long past the scheduled 11 p.m. Eastern end time. Now, I understand that's already pretty late for Eastern time people. It's late for me too. And if you guys say, look, I absolutely am not okay with that, and you really need to keep it directly on time, I will. But if you guys are okay with it, I kind of think, hey, it's a few minutes of free tutoring. If you need to duck out at 11, that's fine. You can watch the last few minutes on the video, kind of like a free bonus. But I don't want to upset anyone with the times that we listed. So is it cool with you guys if I run just a few minutes long? Keenan says all good. I don't think this is a fact. What do you need to do? I mean, that's kind of like, I don't know, like depends what you value. I don't know that this is even really a fact statement. Okay, everyone seems to be okay with it. Yeah, no problem letting you know. And again, look, if we get to the official end time and you're like, man, I really got to go, no one's going to be like butthurt if you duck out and watch the last 10 minutes on video later on. But if you hang around, a few extra minutes of tutoring time at no charge, bonus, hooray. And that way I don't have to rush stuff and I can make sure that we really understand things rather than just hustling through to get to the end. I'm not convinced that the green sentence is actually a fact statement. Like, that's not so objective for me. What you need to do is kind of like what you should do or ought to do. This feels pretty opinion to me. The other thing with it is this is totally a fact statement. And this is also kind of in the middle, right? Like, what will happen in the future is always a little uncertain, so I'm not sure this is totally a fact statement, but I mean, the green statement is even more speculative than the yellow one. So I don't think that the call to action test is cutting against this being the ultimate conclusion at all. Okay. Renisha's typing. Go ahead. I'm going to start having us do a couple drills. So I know what this question says. What's the role of statement boldface? What I want to know is this. Specifically, is the bolded portion of this argument the ultimate conclusion, yes or no? Why or why not? And if it's not the ultimate conclusion, what is the ultimate conclusion? Okay, so is it the ultimate conclusion? If it's not the ultimate conclusion, what is and why? And the floor is open for your answers. Shout them out. Open floor. I think Renisha saying so blank is kind of the same thing, right? Like so is a conclusion indicator word. So, you know, that will also do the same thing. So that's a fair approach as well. The key thing, either way you do it, is make sure you understand whether you're actually looking at the very end of the chain or not. Daniel says this is not the ultimate conclusion. The ultimate conclusion is this is a dangerous practice. That's only part of what I wanted. One of my biggest questions is, how do you know? I'm always interested in the process, not just the answer. So really, anytime I ask a question, even if it seems to call for an answer, I'd love to hear what your process was. I'd love to hear not just what the answer is, but why, and how you know. Jocelyn says that there's more to the conclusion. I think you're right, actually. But again, the question is why, and no one's answering it. No one's given me a single why to any of this. How did you know? Explain. So finally gives you the continuation. It tells me there's more to the conclusion. But if you're mentioning finally, I'm going to mention also. The practice is also demonstrably inefficient. So I think there's two continuation words that say that I've got a three-part conclusion here. This is a dangerous practice. It's also demonstrably inefficient. Finally, it commercializes. And none of those things support the other. It's not dangerous because it's inefficient. It's not inefficient because it's dangerous. So I don't agree with Shreya when you say the rest of the paragraph gives evidence why it's dangerous. I think up to here gives evidence why it's dangerous. But after that, the fact that it may not have the blood type that's needed is not dangerous. The fact that it's commercial or the fact that it's, inefficient, that's not dangerous, okay? So, I see some people trying to do something that kind of looks like the Y test, but maybe not all of them are doing it great, because Ben, I don't agree that the three sentences following are all supporting the idea. I think this far supports the idea, and the rest is off in some other direction doing something else, okay? But also, I've got more than just the Y test, people. What else do I have? What about indicator words? Did anyone want to point out this because? I know we already talked about the also and the finally. What about this because? Let's talk about indicator words, right? Now, the because here suggests that the thing after the because is a premise. It's a premise indicator word, and that's true. People who have the disease and who are desperate for money may lie in order to sell their blood is a premise. It's a first premise. And that means that this is not strictly speaking a premise. Somebody said this was a premise. I don't think that's entirely true. It is some manner of conclusion because it's based on the fact that people may lie in order to sell their blood. But it's not the ultimate conclusion, because if you do the Y test, as several of you tried to do, this ultimately turns around and explains why it's dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because it increases risk of hepatitis. Why does it do that? Because people may lie in order to sell their blood. So the ultimate conclusion is this. The intermediate conclusion is this. And the first premise is that. And yes, if you're wondering, inefficient and commercial are also conclusion. Ultimate conclusion. The bolded portion was an intermediate conclusion supporting the ultimate conclusion that this is a dangerous practice. We used the Y test and the indicator words to establish that. Is everyone very clear about how we broke this argument down? Yes, the ultimate conclusion is the practice is dangerous, inefficient, and commercial. The intermediate conclusion supporting the danger is it increases the risk of hepatitis. The first premise that supports the increased risk is because people who have the disease may lie in order to sell their blood. The second part of the conclusion, it's demonstrably inefficient, is supported by the premise that people willing to sell blood may not have the blood types needed. The conclusion that it's commercial doesn't really have a clear premise that supports it. You just sort of have to pick it up from the fact that they're buying and selling the blood. So I think I went through that. Keenan says, but doesn't what makes it dangerous, the ultimate conclusion is the Y test applied, and why is dangerous? I don't understand, Keenan. I'm sorry, can you reword? The Y test also plays on why is it inefficient? Why is it inefficient? Well, because people may not have the right blood types. Why is it commercial? Well, I mean, dude, you're buying and selling your blood. That sounds commercial to me. They're all parts of the conclusion. Now, that's a very complicated argument structure. Yes, the bolded statement is an intermediate conclusion, which for our purposes is mostly like a premise, right? Like, it's kind of in the middle, but since what we're primarily interested in is the ultimate conclusion of the argument, I still kind of look at an intermediate conclusion and say, man, this is not that, you know? No. Keenan, the thing that explains why is a premise. The thing that we're explaining is the conclusion. But if the thing in bold explains why it's dangerous, that means the thing in bold is not the ultimate conclusion. I think you're getting the Y test backwards there. If you're answering the why question about something else, you are not the ultimate conclusion. Absolutely not. Let's do another, shall we? By the way, there's the answer. This one, you're not going to have to rank, but, well, look, you may have to be able to distinguish between an intermediate and an ultimate conclusion, Jocelyn. It is possible that you have to say, hey, this is not the ultimate conclusion, it's an intermediate conclusion. All right? So when you say rank, I would just say, yeah, you might have to say the difference between intermediate and ultimate, but that's it. What about this one? Numero 2. Yeah, this is the conclusion of the argument. But again, I'd love for you to tell me why. Siddharth says it answers the Y test. Why are there at least as many trees in Ithaca as Hanover? How do I know? Why do you say that? Well, because I planted more trees in Ithaca. I would also point to the keyword inferred here. I think that's very significant. And I would look at both of those things. Now, let me just ask you, just as a bonus, as a throw-in, was this a good conclusion? Ah, shoot, I guess it popped up already. I don't like, Cecilia, what you just said, and I'll tell you why. Because they're both facts, right? Whether more trees were planted is something I can go and objectively count and figure out. But you know what? Whether there are more trees in Ithaca than Hanover, or at least as many, is also a fact that I can go and count. I regard the call to action as equivocal here. It does not cut either way. These are both fact statements. Now, do you think this is a good conclusion? Nah, this is a shitty conclusion. Tell me why. What's so terrible about this conclusion? I mean, hey, I planted more trees, so there's more trees. I mean, what's so hard to understand? What's the problem? Ah, how many trees did I start with? Maybe I started with more trees, you know? Yeah, I planted more trees in Ithaca than Hanover, but there were just way more trees to begin with in Hanover, so actually, no, that didn't work. What else? Besides, you know, planting more trees, what's the other thing? maybe how many trees died, right? Yeah, you know, I started with more trees in Ithaca, and I planted more trees in Ithaca, but then there was that giant fire and burned down every last tree in the whole county, so yeah, not anymore. Whoops. And I think that's really it. You know, how many died, how many were there to begin with, and we needed to consider that, and this is a bad argument. Let's do another. What about this statement? What is this? And why? Again, always why. And yeah, that's a very good point, Renisha. Just because it's a shitty conclusion doesn't make it less of a conclusion. That's why my definition said that it was a series of premises that attempt to establish a conclusion. They may not do a good job. I agree, that's a garbage conclusion, but it's still the conclusion. It's just that it's a conclusion that we have to say, hey, wait a minute, that sucks. What about this one? Brain loses sensitivity, ... is what? Is the conclusion, how do you know? Why do we lose sensitivity? Because the barrier determines which substances. This barely even qualifies as a premise. I think, and by the way, everyone's running to the Y-test every time. I don't like that, and I'll tell you why. The Y-test is the most powerful tool of all. It's also the most work. It's also the hardest. The first one that I generally want to start with is indicator words. If there's indicator words, I really expect to hear about them. What about my because? Tell me about the because. This occurs because. The stuff after the because has to be a premise, because because is a premise indicator word. So that's premise. But this, when I say this occurs because, should be the conclusion. What is this? Well, it's the first sentence that I'm referring back to. So that means that, yeah, the first sentence is the conclusion. Why? Well, first of all, yes, you're right. It passes the Y-test. But also, second of all, we had a very big, very important indicator word there that tells me in, very explicitly that that first statement is the conclusion, or at least a conclusion. And I agree with the person who said, where did the person say that it was context? Yes, Stephen. I agree with Stephen. The bolded portion barely even would qualify as a premise. It's just sort of dangling off there, right? Like I've already got my why. Why do we lose sensitivity? Because the flow is controlled by permeability of a barrier. This is like context. It's just kind of just dangling off of there. It barely has any connection to the rest of it. It's just telling me a little more about the barrier. So I would call this context. If you wanted to call it premise, we're not going to fight about it. I won't get too worked up. But for me, context. What about this one? Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the fact that it was founded in 1872 seems pretty factual. The purpose of it to promote the planting and growth of trees, maybe it's a statement of fact. I guess it depends who you ask whether they all agree on the purpose. But I tend to see it Ronak's way. This doesn't really connect very much, okay? I look at this and I see essentially no indicator words that tie to this statement. I see essentially nothing that follows from this statement logically. I think this is just a context statement. What's the ultimate conclusion? No. No, it cannot be its own premise. As a result is a conclusion indicator word. That's probably the most important phrase in the argument. The ultimate conclusion is they advocate that land should be set aside. Note also the should, call to action, right? Land should be set aside to plant millions of acres of trees. Now, why should land be set aside to plant millions of acres of trees? Well, because large-scale planting of trees would be beneficial for the environment. Why would large-scale planting of trees be beneficial for the environment? Well, because trees reduce erosion, provide homes for animals, and draw harmful pollutants from the atmosphere. So if you ask me, if I labeled those sentences 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1 is context. It's just dangling. It's doing nothing. And then sentence 3 is a premise. Sentence 2 is an intermediate conclusion. And sentence 4 is the ultimate. That's how this is structured. Trees reduce erosion, and therefore it would be beneficial for the environment to plant trees, and therefore we should do that. Renisha is on board. Rest of you guys, have I convinced you? The separation, Keenan, between context and premise is a little fuzzy, but it's basically about whether this thing actually meaningfully supports something else in the argument, or even meaningfully attempts to support it. If it's just hanging out, kind of giving you some general information, but it's not really tied very tightly to anything, it's context. If, on the other hand, it's actually attempting to support something else, then it's premise. Ultimately, that's the distinction I care least about. Since the thing I'm most interested in is conclusions, I rarely sweat the context versus premise discussion. Siddharth, if you're saying in the order in which the statements are given, yes, the 4 sentences in order are context, intermediate conclusion, premise, ultimate conclusion. One more. The Lions will win the Super Bowl. Hooray, finally. What's that? A dream. It's a lie. Okay. Hey, fine. No one said it had to be true. Remember, you can have a bad conclusion. It can still be a conclusion, and that's what Daniel thinks it is. Does everyone agree with Daniel? Cecilia says conclusion. Give me evidence. Tell me how you know. Let's talk about process. I don't just want the answer. You think it's a conclusion, you tell me why it's a conclusion. I have a because here, but wait. Keenan disagrees with you guys. You guys are just saying this is the conclusion, but Keenan says the Super Bowl party is the ultimate conclusion. Because of the premise indicator, you're wrong about so, though, Siddharth. Be careful. So is a conclusion indicator. All right? Indicator would because, so this is premise. Okay, and this is also premise because noting the so, I'm going to have premise because or so premise so conclusion, excuse me. But now hang on. We have 2 statements here that are both conclusions in some manner. The Lions will win the Super Bowl and we need to plan the parade. And now they are both opinion. This hasn't happened yet, so who can say for sure? Do we need to plan the parade? Who can really say? They both have indicator words that lean the same way. I'm going to have to do the why test. Why are the Lions going to win the Super Bowl? Because we need a parade, damn it. That doesn't make any sense, right? How about the other way around? We need to plan a parade. Why? Because the Lions are going to the Super Bowl. Aha. And now you guys, several of you have picked up on this. The ultimate conclusion is this. It's we need to plan the parade. This is an intermediate conclusion. Why do we need to plan the parade? Because they're going to win the Super Bowl. Okay? Intermediate conclusion, ultimate conclusion, stuff in the middle is premises. Got it? Are we clear? Are we agreed? Okay. So I hope that having been through this 5 times, you guys are getting a little clearer on breaking down arguments and understanding it. Would you say that you're feeling better about this? Yep. Well, you do need to think about the whole argument. Of course, one of the big tests here is how everything fits together. And of course, the indicator words may not be inside your statement. They may be somewhere else in the argument. So you do need to look at the whole thing. Okay? This is true. All right. Now that I have finally gotten us clear about making distinctions between premises and conclusions, I would like to abandon that distinction for a little while. What, you say? That makes no sense. Oh well. Because see, ultimately, if I go even one step further out into abstraction, I can say these all kind of look the same. Ultimately, they're all just statements. They're statements that may be either true or false, you know, and I can give them a fancy name. I can call them propositions, and a proposition is simply a true or false statement. Both conclusions and premises are types of propositions, and just for our shorthanding, I'm going to use a single capital letter or possibly a couple of them to represent my propositions. So if I say, it's raining, R for raining. I have my umbrella, U for umbrella. Someone less qualified than Stauning will be appointed head of the planning commission, SLQ TSA. Of course, what else would you use? I mean, obviously, SLQ TSA. And now I can build my arguments from propositions, and I can say that an argument is simply a series of propositions that attempt to establish another one. That's all it is. And what I really want is to develop tools for manipulating propositions, for connecting them and building arguments out of them. And there are tools for that. They're called logical operators. And I am not interested in going through every possible logical operator. There are lots of them. And if you've ever taken a class on formal logic, I'm sure you learned about them, and that's great for you. I'm only interested in talking about 2. And I'm going to talk about negation, also known as the not operator, and talk about implication, logical implication, also known as the arrow diagram. We'll talk about them in the abstract, and then we'll talk about what they mean for us in sort of real life. Okay? Starting with the not operator, negation. Negation is so simple. Okay? You stick a not in front of the statement, it flips the truth value. If A is true, then not A is false. If A is false, then not A is true. Double negative cancels out. Not A, well, that's just A. Does that make sense? Pretty clear? Good. Good, good. The thing about this is it's pretty simple in the abstract. A true, not a false, not a true. It gets slightly trickier when we actually take it to language and try to make it real as opposed to this weird formal logic stuff. So let me ask you a question. Negation gives me the logical opposite. So what's the opposite of hot? Oh, you guys are too good. Oh, well, okay. You were too good, and then we got a little run of cold. The correct answer is not hot. And if you said cold, you're actively wrong. It's not just as good, it's wrong. Why? Because it's the wrong kind of opposite. Now, look, it's really my fault, okay? See, my question was a bad question. Because when I asked you, what is the opposite of hot, one thing you might have reasonably said to me is, well, you know, what kind of opposite? What do you mean the opposite of hot? You want to clarify that for us? And that would have been a very reasonable response because as it turns out, there's not just a single concept of opposites in the English language. There are actually 2. There are logical opposites and there are polar opposites, and they're not always the same thing. And to make matters worse, the one that we use most often in normal casual conversation is not the one that we're talking about on the GMAT. In real life, when I say the opposite, I mostly mean the polar opposite. The GMAT never does polar opposites, it only does logical opposites. So what is the polar opposite? Well, the polar opposite is the opposite extreme. It's the negative mirror image. The polar opposite of hot is cold, of tall is short, of white is black, of Superman is Bizarro Superman for you comic book nerds. Okay? And if, you know, in real life, somebody said, oh my gosh, it was so hot in that classroom today, and I said, what are you talking about? It was like the opposite of that. You wouldn't be like, oh, what do you mean? It was like just warm? It was like room temperature? No, come on. I mean cold, obviously. When I say it was like the opposite of hot, I meant that it was really cold in the room, right? And that's real life. But it's not this test because we only do logical opposites. So what's the logical opposite? The logical opposite is everything else. It covers the field. It is all the possibilities other than the given one. So the opposite of hot is everything besides hot, which is cold, yes, but also warm, but also room temperature, but also cool, but also everything else other than hot, okay? And the logical opposite of white is black and pink and green and brown and blue and yellow and orange, and name a color, any color, just don't say white. And the opposite of Superman is Bizarro Superman, but also you. Unless you're Superman, in which case you would not be the opposite of Superman. And now I'm wondering, I've never seen you in the same room with Superman. Maybe you are. Okay, let's move on. That was dumb. How do you get a logical opposite? Well, you could just be really dumb about it and throw the word not in front. It always works, it's not always useful, okay? It is the not operator after all. The problem with it is that when you do that, that's never the end of the story. They're never going to say, hey, what's the opposite of this thing? And you just put the not in front and you're like, great, I'm done, hooray, I win. It doesn't happen. You put the not in front or whatever, you get the opposite and you do something with it. And sometimes that's fine, but we don't reason as well using negative statements. So usually if you're going to do this, you're going to want to paraphrase to a positive statement. You're going to want to then reword it, you know? Because otherwise you end up saying things like, what's the opposite of none? Well, it's not none. Well, that's great that the opposite of none is not none, but what the hell is not none? Because I'm confused, you know? And so, as I said in the slides, not none doesn't do no favors to nobody. And that's true, I think. I'm not sure because there's too many nots in there and I'm confused. But that's exactly why it's important to paraphrase these into positive statements so you actually understand what the hell you just said. Alternatively, you can think about covering the field. The opposite of hot is everything besides hot. It's all the other possibilities, you know? And another way to get there is to try to argue with me as gently as possible. If I say all of the pens are red, you don't need to prove to me that all of the pens are non-red. That's not necessary. You just need to prove to me one non-red pen. You show me one pen that's not red, and you've defeated my claim that all pens are red. So what's the logical opposite of all pens are red? One pen or more, not red. Everything, the least that you could do to argue with me, and that and everything beyond that collectively form the logical opposite. One more way on the bottom there. So here's some examples. Must be true, could be false. Sometimes versus never, could be true versus must be false. Everywhere versus not everywhere. All versus not all, some versus none. It's important to be comfortable with these. It's important to recognize how these work and what logical opposites are, and most of all just to know that the GMAT will only do logical opposites and never ever polar opposites. Never. Now this does point out one more thing to me when I look at the some versus none and the all versus not all, and this is one more way in which the GMAT is not real life. Not all is not the same as some. These things are different. Okay? And the reason is, well, because not all is anything from 0 up to and including all minus 1. But some doesn't include 0. Some means 1 or more, so note that it's different here. And here's something paradoxical and weird. Some goes all the way up to and including all. So this is another way in which the GMAT is not real life. If in real life I told you some of the kids are going to the ballpark, you might very reasonably ask me, oh, that's interesting. What are the rest of them doing? What are the other kids doing? And if I then were to say to you, oh yeah, they're also going to the ballpark, you would be well within your rights to slap me around a little bit, right? Like, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean some of them are going and the rest are also going? What's your problem, you idiot? You know, disingenuous moron, you call me some names, etc., at least. And you'd be well within your rights, because what I just did is disingenuous at best. But the thing is, on the GMAT, I'm technically correct. I did not lie to you. Because after all, if all of the kids are going, it's true that some of them are going. And yes, so are the rest of them. So recognize that on the GMAT, the word some means one or more, up to and possibly including all. If I say some of them, that could be all of them. And I know that's weird, but hey, it's just the GMAT. Okay? Are we clear on the logical opposite thing? Good. Questions, or I'm moving on? Okay, moving on. The other operator I want to talk about today is called logical implication, also known as the arrow diagram. And the arrow diagram allows me not just to manipulate a proposition, but actually to connect it to other propositions. And if I want to build a chain of reasoning, it seems like a good thing to be able to move from one diagram to another to another. The arrow diagram, written like this, A arrow B, is actually a very simple thing. I rarely will say A arrow B in words. I'll usually say A implies B. But to understand further what this means, I want to give you another couple things you could say that are exactly equivalent. When I say that A implies B, what I mean, and all I mean, is if A, then B. I can really spell it out for you. If A is true, then B is true. So understand that when I say A arrow B, what I mean is that if A is true, then B is true. And I do not mean anything else. Is everyone clear that A implies B, A arrow B means that if A is true, then B is true, and that's all. That's all that it is. Is that very clear? Let me hear from you on this one. This is important. Bryson's clear. Other people, you clear? Steven's clear. Yep, great. Lots of people are clear. Very good. Okay, then you should have no problem helping me figure out a little chart that helps me understand the arrow diagram A implies B. So, given the arrow diagram A implies B, if A is true, then B is? If A is true, then B is? True. Yeah, of course. Everyone says true, and everyone is quite right. If A is true, then B is true. Okay, and of course, if A is false, then B is? Dot, 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 might be true, false, question mark, false, 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 not true, not, okay, we got a little bit of confusion on this one. Yes, yes, I'm gonna tell you, Karen, okay. Carla says, doesn't tell us anything about B, and Carla's the winner. That's the most right thing you could say. In fact, that's almost verbatim what I said. And this is the really important thing. And I got a lot of you, and look, I know, I set you up, okay? I'm really sorry. No, I'm not. I'm not sorry at all. I'm an asshole. I like this. I love my job. I love suckering all you poor saps every single time. And every time I do this, I get a whole bunch of people. But here's the thing. As much as I'm a jerk, and as much as I just suckered you all, isn't it better? Wouldn't you rather that I be a jerk and sucker you in this way than that I'd be a really nice guy and not trick you this way, and then the test makers do it and you had no idea what was coming? Isn't it better that you saw this from me first? I did say, and I meant it, and I made sure that you understood, right? I stopped the class, I said, I need everyone to tell me they understand this. This arrow diagram, if A implies B, it means that if A is true, then B is true, and nothing else. So I may be evil, but I'm that lawful kind of evil, you know? Like in D&D, I play lawful evil characters, at least when I do GMAT courses, all right? So my lawful evil self told you the rules and then misled you using the rules. But if A is true, B is true, and if A is false, B could be either true or false. I have no information. Are you very clear on that now? If A is true, then B is true. If A is false, I have no idea about B. The only thing it told me was if A is true, then B is true. I get nothing else at all. Now, I understand this is a little abstract, so I've prepared a somewhat more tangible example. And this example is something about me that I want you to know. All right? Tell you a little bit about myself. I know you don't know me that well. I don't like to get wet. Okay? Got this great straw hat here. It gets wet, it gets all floppy. Also, I melt because I'm a witch. So if it's raining, then I will have my umbrella. Okay? And I say this, absolute certainty. This is a premise that you may take as a premise. If it's raining, then I'll have my umbrella. So let's answer some questions about Anthony. Okay? What do you know if I tell you that it's raining? I will have my umbrella. Absolutely. That's exactly what I just told you. If it's raining, I'll have my umbrella. So if it's raining, I will have my umbrella. Great. What do you know if it's not raining? You know nothing. You know nothing at all because you don't know. You don't know me. Maybe I'm just like a delicate southern gentleman who does not like to get sun in my eyes. Right? Right? Got my parasol, and I am all set to be made in the shade. You know nothing. I am very delicate. I really am. So you know nothing if I tell you that it's not raining. And that's important. What do you know if I have my umbrella? Nothing. Again, you know nothing. I might have my umbrella because it's raining, or I might have my umbrella because delicate southern gentleman, you don't know, right? So again, nothing at all. What if I don't have my umbrella? Not raining. You do know something now. Because if I go all the way back to that chart, look at how B is false. The only way B was false, the only way no umbrella is if A was false, if no raining, okay? So if I go forwards again, if I don't have my umbrella, I guarantee you it's not raining. Because if it was raining, I would have had that umbrella. And this is actually interesting because it means there's not just one thing I can say. There's two when I have an arrow diagram. And this means that saying A implies B is equivalent to not B implies not A. Raining implies umbrella. No umbrella implies no raining. Those are the same statement in every way, shape, and form. This is so important and fancy that we give it a fancy name called the contrapositive. Big scary word that just means, hey, wait, those two things are the same statement. This is useful because sometimes you'll be looking for a particular piece of information on the GMAT and you won't find it exactly like you're looking for it. Before you give up and throw your hands in the air and go, oh, my life is a lie, just consider that there is another form that would give you the same thing. If raining, then umbrella. If no umbrella, then not raining. Those statements are the same statement. Okay? But I still need a little bit more. Okay? Because I've got the arrow diagrams I can connect from A to B, but I don't just want to go from A to B. I want to go from A to B to C to D to as far as I want to go. I want to be able to make a chain of reasoning as long as I want. And so I need one more thing, and it's not another operator. It's a principle of formal logic. And it's so intuitive. It's called the transitive property, and the thing is, I think that everyone could have predicted what the conclusion was based on these two premises. If A implies B and B implies C, then, well, of course, A implies C, right? Like, that's just normal and natural and perfectly sensible. Would you agree? Does this make sense to everybody? If A implies B and B implies C, then A implies C. I like to call this the plane ticket theorem sometimes because, you know, it's just basically saying you can make connecting flights, nothing too fancy. It says, hey, if you got a plane ticket from Atlanta to Boston, and you get a plane ticket from Boston to Chicago, then by God, you can fly from Atlanta to Chicago. Just, catch a connection in Boston and go about your merry way. That is all that it is saying. So it's intuitive. It's simple to state and it makes sense, I hope. But the thing is that it's trickier in application. So let me talk about what you can and cannot do with this transitive property thing. One thing you can do, you can state the premises in either order. You give me B implies C and A implies B, no problem. I just say, oops, you gave me your plane tickets in the wrong order. Here you go. I hand them back to you, and you're fine. You go make your connecting flights, and you're good to go. No problem. That's fine. State your premises in any order you want. However, if you change the directions of the arrow diagrams, then we got some issues. If you tell me A implies B and C implies B, well, you clearly like Boston, but you are not making any connections with those plane tickets. Am I right? And similarly, if you tell me B implies A and B implies C, well, you're getting the hell out of Boston now, but again, no connecting flights for you. You have to go from the end of one arrow diagram to the start of another. End of one to the start of another. End of one to the start of another. If you can do that, you're fine. If you can't do that, you're wrong, and you can't make a connection. Now that probably is pretty straightforward as well. I hope it's clear. This next thing may also seem straightforward, but it turns out that this is the one that gets people, this next one. If A implies B and Greek letter beta implies C, conclusion is no conclusion. Why? Because, hey, guess what? B and beta are different. They're not the same thing. They look similar. They have a lot in common. But if they're not the same thing, you cannot make that connection. It's like having a plane ticket from Atlanta to Boston and a plane ticket from Baltimore to Chicago. And you just can't do it. You can't get from Atlanta to Chicago without another plane ticket or a really long bus ride. That's not good enough. And I know, you're sitting there thinking, my God, Baltimore and Boston look so much alike. And every time I'm in either of those two East Coast cities that start with the letter B, I'm always standing there going, I just can't tell. Is this Baltimore or Boston? They're just exactly the same, right? Okay. You're probably not thinking that. You're probably thinking, my God, no one would ever mistake any part of Boston except maybe, I don't know, the very worst parts for any part of Baltimore except, I don't know, maybe the very best parts. Like maybe the worst parts of Boston and the best parts of Baltimore could somehow be confused for one another. I'm sorry, by the way, if you're from Baltimore, for many reasons. I'm very sorry. But you're probably thinking, I would never make this mistake. This is so obvious, right? I would not fall for that. And if that's what you're thinking, I'm here to tell you that you're probably wrong. You would fall for this. You probably have already fallen for this, and you will almost certainly fall for it again more than once. Because you've been trained to. You've been taught for pretty much your entire life to make exactly this mistake. Now that's a bold thing for me to say, isn't it? I mean, my God, I don't know you that well. How can I possibly say that you've been trained almost your entire life to make this mistake of all things? And the answer comes from this. Have you ever taken a class on writing, class on speaking? Have any of you ever learned the importance of varying your terms? Anyone ever learn that, if you have to repeat yourself, and sometimes it may be unavoidable, to repeat yourself, that if you must, at the very least, you need to use different words when you do so and not say the same thing over and over in exactly the same way because people will hate you for that. Is this something that any of you have ever heard before in your lives or ever become aware of? Keenan says yes, Renisha says sure, Daniel says yep, Carla says yes. Several of you are saying yes, and I imagine a few more of you, Stephen, Akil, Harjit, yeah, absolutely. At least a third of you have learned this. I'm guessing that of the rest of you, a lot of you also have. But even if you're in a somewhat small group that has never heard this before, never learned this, recognize that a lot of the people surrounding you have. And a lot of the people you listen to and a lot of the people whose writing you read have spent most of their lives being taught that it is important to vary their terms. And therefore, you have spent most of your life being taught that when somebody who you are listening to or somebody whose work you are reading does this, when they vary their terms, they're not actually saying something fundamentally different. They're just using a synonym and expressing the same idea in a different way. And you have all been trained by simple exposure that this is true. Right? Right? And the problem with that is that, once again, the GMAT is not real life. And so you have been taught not to notice when this switch happens, but when the GMAT does it, that may be the entire game of the question. The whole point is that this thing is not the same as that thing. Baltimore is not Boston. B is not beta. Those arrows don't connect. And that's the gap in the argument. But the thing is, this may not even be conscious for you, okay? I've seen students, and I have a whole story about this, but I'm going to skip in the interest of time. I've seen students just completely read the wrong word off the page while staring it down and pointing at it. And they had no awareness they were doing this. Because somewhere in their brain saw this word and just went, nope, this is not supposed to be this word. It's supposed to be that other word that I've already decided it was meant to be instead. And when you do that and you just don't have the slightest idea that it's happening, how are you supposed to get that question right? When that whole question was, the gap is between those two things not being the same. But your brain has said they are. You can't do that question. So you have to make this conscious. You have to retrain your brain. You have to make a conscious effort, starting now, that when you do these questions, you need to look for the switches and you need to say to your brain that these things matter and that you're going to notice them and you're going to consider them. I'm not saying every time they switch terms it's the key to the question. Sometimes they're just using a synonym. It's true. But I am saying that every time they switch terms, you should think about it. You should evaluate it. You should question whether that might actually be a meaningful gap and might be what the question is testing. And sometimes the answer will be, nah, there's nothing really going on here. There's no answer choices that address that thing. It's just a synonym. And other times the answer will be, yeah, absolutely. That's the whole game of the question. Here, have a right answer. Congratulations. And that's nice, right? So this is a question that I had that story about, where a student literally said the wrong word aloud when I asked them to read the question aloud because they were convinced on an unconscious level that this was a synonym. And I want to show it to you, and I want you to tell me, what was the issue? What was the not actually synonym that made this question go? And I know I'm a couple minutes over. I got this thing, and then I got one question for us to do because I do want to show you one legit GMAT question at the end so you can see how this works in real life, well, in real GMAT life, and then we'll be done. But meantime, what's the problem? Exactly, Jocelyn and Ronak, you're absolutely right. This is a real question, by the way. I didn't write this one. This is actually an old LSAT question, but the LSAT does critical reasoning just like the GMAT does. It could just as well have been a GMAT question. Now, I'm curious, how many of you did not catch this, or how many of you will say that you wouldn't have caught this if you weren't specifically looking for it because I asked you to? Just let me know if either you didn't catch it or if you think, hey, if I hadn't really been making the conscious effort because of this discussion tonight, I probably would not have. Daniel, Renisha, Siddharth, Carla. And look, I understand, I get it. Akil, I get it. I'm sympathetic. I'm not judging. Because in real life, if I'm having this conversation, yeah, you know, the charter says they need some special needs students. They don't have any with learning disabilities yet, so like it's a problem. If I'm doing that in real life, I'm not trying to put one over on you. I am just kind of varying my terms. It actually means to be the same thing. But now that you know, I'm glad you were on it, Greg. That's good. You've seen my tricks before. But now that you know, I hope you see how important it is to make a very conscious effort, because either you didn't catch it or you wouldn't have caught it, a lot of you. And on this question, I can tell you for a fact, because I know what the answer choices are, I'm not going to go into it, but I know that that was the whole thing. And if you were able to recognize, hey, wait a minute, these aren't the same, then you're going to get the right answer. And by the way, they really aren't the same, right? Like, there could be other kinds of special needs besides learning disabilities. And maybe they don't have learning disability students, but maybe they got some of those other special needs kids, you know? And if there was an answer choice that said that, then that would probably be a really good answer to pick. And that's just it. That's the whole question. If you can do that, you win. You get the point. So this is a big deal, and it's harder than you might have thought before we came in here. You might think, oh yeah, of course I'd notice if they just started talking about something completely different halfway through a question. But they're good at it, and you're trained badly, and so you probably won't notice until you make a point of it. So please, please make a point of it starting now. Now, I promised you, and I do want to show you at least one question before we go so that you can see what it looks like on the test. So I'm going to open a poll and a 2-minute timer. You're going to do this question, we're going to discuss this question, and then we will be done for the night. Okay, that's the plan. I'm going to set the timer now. Go ahead. Poll is open, timer's running. There is a poll. Please put your answers in the poll rather than shouting them out in the chat. Please do not shout answers out in the chat. Please just choose them into the poll. Okay? So the time is up. I'm now going to end the poll. I'm now going to show the results. And I gotta say, you guys did all right here. This was not that bad. The most picked answer was the right answer. And some of you caught the gap. Shawali kind of spoiled it for us. I want to go through this in order, though. First question, what is the conclusion of this argument? And I here will note the however and the since as the indicator words. A lot of people wrongly think that the conclusion is the last sentence, and I'm sorry to say, but that is incorrect. Why is that incorrect? Well, first of all, there's only two indicator words that I see here, and it's the however and the since. And neither of those is in any way connected to the last sentence, but the since tells me that this stuff, starting from officials and going to the end, is a premise for sure. And the however tells me that something before the however, in this case the first sentence, goes the other direction. So if I'm looking for a conclusion, it's not there, and it's not here, right? We can cross those out, and that leaves me only two statements to look at. Those consequences will not be our fault. No newspaper can fairly be blamed. And a lot of people make the mistake of thinking it's the last sentence. First of all, because it's the last sentence. And a lot of people, somewhere in the back of their unconscious mind, still have that middle school thought process of, if it's at the end, it's probably the conclusion. And then they reinforce it with, and this is an opinion. And they're like, oh, it's an opinion at the end, clearly the conclusion. The problem is, those consequences will not be our fault is also an opinion, and the end thing is meaningless. The end thing is nothing. It's nonsense. It's got no bearing whatsoever. So I'm left with, I've got two opinion statements, one of which has a sense after it, which is suggestive, and I need to do the why test. Okay? Note the however sense. Now let's talk about why. Why can't a newspaper be blamed for accurate reporting? Why not? Is there anything in this argument that tells me why? And I'll save you the trouble. No, there's nothing. Not because those consequences won't be our fault in this case. You're telling me because in one case, these consequences won't be one newspaper's fault, so no newspaper can ever be blamed for accurate reporting? That's a pretty big leap. I don't buy it. But try it the other way. Why won't the consequences in this case be our fault? Well, because you can't blame us for accurate reporting as a newspaper. Newspapers can't be blamed for accurate reporting. Hey, that makes some sense. I'm not saying it's right. Obviously, there's a gap somewhere, but it makes some sense. So the conclusion is those consequences will not be our fault. The indicator words, like the since, support it. The since is a really big deal here, and it passes the why test. Does everyone agree that this is the conclusion? Yes, no? Especially looking for Karen and Keenan and all the people who had this maybe not quite right the first time. Have I sold you on this? Okay. I am full screen on this. I mean, I don't have a way to cut myself out of the viewer, so I don't really know what else to say. I think you might be able to resize the viewer. If you need, this question is also in the book. You can grab the book and you can read along there. It's in book 1. Okay, so we have the conclusion. Let's get the path to the conclusion. Why won't the consequences be our fault? Well, two premises. It was an acceptable translation, right? I'm not sure, Carla. Again, I'm such the wrong person to ask about tech stuff, actually. I'm really bad at tech. You can play around with the Adobe Connect viewer on your end, but otherwise I am clueless, and I'm sorry about that. It's just not my thing. I'm a tutor, not a computer guy. Premises. Our translation has been confirmed as acceptable. No newspaper can be blamed because reporting was accurate, and here's the gap. Siddhartha already pointed it out. Translation acceptable. Reporting accurate. Wait, those are not the same thing. Look, I grant, acceptable, accurate, they got a lot of the same letters in them. They sound kind of the same. They mean similar things, but they're different. They're not the same. I have to connect them. Acceptable translation to reporting accurate, I need something that goes from one to the other. Otherwise, I can't make it from beginning to end of my argument. Do you agree that that is what I need? Acceptable translation to accurate reporting is what I need. I should anticipate that. I should recognize that gap from that switch in wording, just like we were talking about. Special needs, learning disabilities, acceptable translation, accurate reporting, same thing. And I should go find it. And if I find it in A, then I win, because it's there. The confirmation the translation is acceptable is sufficient to show that the remarks were accurately reported. The correct answer is A. All the other answers are wrong because they just don't bridge that gap. And without bridging that gap, nothing else matters. There's a lot of nice stuff in the answers, but nothing that does what I needed. And that's what this test is about. It's not about giving me something that's nice and feels great and whatever. It's about finding a specific issue and addressing it in a specific way. Okay? This is a game of rules that are used to create problems. This is not shades of gray and fuzzy feelings and outside information. That's not what this test is. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts? Told you I wouldn't run more than 15 minutes over, and I'm getting right up against that right now. So last chance. Questions, thoughts, anything, because I am done. Yes, all of the lecture recordings will be up. They usually take about a day because I got to download them off the camera and upload them to the internet, and then, yes, all the lecture recordings will get posted. And then Thursday is going to be math. So like one of the great things about the Tuesdays are all verbal, the Thursdays are all math. So like hopefully it'll be up before Thursday, hopefully it'll be up tomorrow, but it won't matter because it's math. Skill builder for Thursday is arithmetic. Please do the whole entire skill builder until you're an expert. Homework for next Tuesday. The only homework for next Tuesday is this. If you have not already taken a practice test recently, please do so. It's very important to have a baseline, to have a starting point, to know what your issues are and what you need to focus on and at what level. So if you have not yet taken a practice test, and if you've not taken one within the last couple months, then go on the Veritas login. There are 7 full practice tests available. Take one of them no later than next Tuesday, please. The homework is skill builders for this coming Thursday and the following Tuesday, and the practice test. And for now, that's all. Okay? Got it? All right. I'm out of here, guys. I will see you in 2 days. Have a good night. Thanks. Ben, okay, you guys can leave. Ben's got a quick question. Real quick question on this question is the wording that the issue, I would say both this statement and this statement are opinions. Those consequences will not be our fault, says who? That's an opinion. No newspaper can fairly be blamed. What's fair is inherently opinion. That's an opinion, that's an opinion, this is a fact. Who cares about what David Salino thinks? The wording between acceptable translation, accurate reporting is the issue for me in this question. It's just a switch. Acceptable translation, accurate reporting, not the same. Okay, Ben? Got it? We good? No, I think it'd be fine if there was no switch. Look, I need to run. I need to get these videos uploaded. Email me and we can talk more about this, all right? I'm going to get off the camera now. Bye, guys.